the Western fantasy journey that began with Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176, Faith and Belief. What are gods? As a modern man, Renly originally thought that the so-called gods might be some powerful beings with many abilities beyond ordinary cognition. They may exist by relying on the faith of mortals and spread their own will in the secular world at will, or they may be independent and powerful individuals, living in a world invisible to ordinary people. He now thinks that half of his cognition is correct, that is, the gods rely on faith to exist, or there are indeed gods in this world that rely on faith to exist. But this kind of gods are not so great. Carefully considering the birth of gods, the process must be very complicated, but in general, Renly thinks it is very clear. Believe there is, do not believe there is nothing. Under long-term worship, the so-called gods gather many human wills and are born. Renly does not understand other gods, but this one on his wrist, or the drowned god of the Iron Islands. He knows clearly what this thing is. It is the drowned god, but it is also Naga, a primitive totem belief. That's right, the drowned god is the sea dragon Naga, the first sea dragon in the world, the most powerful creature born in the sea. It feeds on sea monsters and sea beasts, and can swallow entire islands when angry. In the story of the Iron Islands, Naga appeared as a villain. The first king of the islands, the Grey King, personally slaughtered it on Old Wake Island, and used its ribs to make beams and pillars, its mouth to make a throne, and its teeth to make a towering pale crown. Finally, the Grey King used the fire of Naga to warm his newly built new hall, and ruled the islands here for 1,000 years, and finally stepped into the sea. This story is talked about by countless Iron races, and is also considered nonsense by many scholars, but in fact it is not a story, but a real thing. Renly could not determine the specific year and month of existence, but when communicating on the top of the hill, he saw with his own eyes the general process of the terrifying sea dragon Naga from being worshipped to being killed. Humans feared it, so they knelt down to worship it, and offered sacrifices to it. As they worshipped it more, the so-called drowned god was born. Unfortunately, no one among the Ironborn understood that the faith in the drowned god, which they had inherited for thousands of years, had actually long been a degenerate and godless pseudo-god school. In other words, the drowned god they chanted day and night had long been killed by their first king, and the divinity that the drowned god had brewed by gathering many human beliefs, or the Naga fire in the story, was also extinguished. So the drowned god no longer existed, both physically and spiritually. But this non-existence was not actually complete, because the drowned god would not completely disappear until this belief was forgotten by humans. It's just that this non-disappearance is actually no different from the real disappearance. Having lost his life and his spirituality, he has become a mindless existence formed by the convergence of many beliefs and wills. What can such an existence do? The facts of the Iron Islands for thousands of years have proved that he can do nothing, because he has become a dead water. It was not until Renly appeared that a ripple appeared in this dead water. Renly didn't understand why this ball of dead water would react to him. He guessed that it might be because of the chaotic mark on his left wrist, or that the characteristics of his psychic heart were sensed by this ball of dead water, which gave him feedback, and then took him through a hazy memory flashback again. At the same time, he couldn't understand why the drowned god would resurrect on his wrist. That's right, resurrection. It's not a real resurrection, but at this moment, a wisp of Naga fire has been born in the blue mark on Renly's wrist, or a wisp of the divinity of the drowned god, which can burn out with just a slight touch. What can it do? Renly couldn't be sure. At least, he didn't think that this thing would continue to breed new seeds like the axe mark, because after a few days of observation, he found that this thing was slowly growing, instead of splitting new flames. At the same time, he could dig out this wisp of flame like the seed of the ancient road, but after digging it out, he could put it back. So Renly guessed that he seemed to, might use this thing to create a god. What's the use of this? In other words, what is the use of creating a god? He was not sure. During the communication with the Naga, he vaguely saw many terrifying scenes that made the sea water roar, but he was not sure whether it was the ability of the sea dragon itself or the power of the drowned god. Because there was only a wisp of fire, Renly did not dare to try it casually. At the same time, he was not prepared to use it on himself, or he tried it, but the fire could not be integrated into his body at all. Maybe this thing is also selective? Everything is unknown. Renly only knows that with the birth of this wisp of fire, his racial level was incidentally raised by 1 level. There is not much information to explain the extra Naga fire characteristics, but referring to the stories and legends, it is very likely that he can live for hundreds or thousands of years. Not to mention the racial level upgrade, he suddenly changed from a mortal with a limited lifespan to an obviously inhuman existence. No one in the world can keep a normal mind for this opportunity. Human beings' desire for longevity comes from the desire deep in life, and this desire is inevitable even for many wise monarchs. Now he has easily obtained it, which is obviously a good thing. But Renly is still a little kid, and he can't feel the existence of aging. He doesn't feel too surprised about this. Or for now, he pays more attention to the troubles that will follow after the fire is lit. Thinking about this, the boy sitting at the head of the bed frowned. The birth of a god, or the revival of a god, obviously can't just be the kind of light on the surface. At the same time, this new fire is obviously a great treasure. If no one knows all this, it will be fine. But the commotion that day was so big, hundreds of thousands of eyes saw the vast scene like the descent of a god. If all this is spread, Westeros is indeed a medieval world that looks normal, but who knows what is hidden in this world? Is he the only one who knows the business? I can't wait any longer as planned, lest I be found by some evil spirits. He thought to himself. Leaving Old Wyke or the Iron Islands was not a difficult matter for Renly at the moment, because many drowned men had begun to obey him unconditionally, but if he communicated with the drowned men directly, Renly was a little hesitant about this, but this mentality of his basically disappeared that afternoon. Because of the arrival of a visitor, a better opportunity was presented to him. The visitor was Balon Greyjoy, the King of the Iron Islands. Chapter 177 The Result of the War. Balon Greyjoy, the King of the Iron Islands, is a complete Iron race, which can be seen from his personality and appearance. His black hair is mixed with a few strands of silver, his eyes are sharp and tenacious, and his thin and angular face makes him look particularly cold. Perhaps he did not make a big fuss this time. He was wearing an inconspicuous grey robe, and the outermost linen cloak wrapped around his thin body. When he stepped into the tent, he looked like a moving spear. This was not the first time Renly had seen him, but last time he had no time to observe him carefully, and at the same time he was not yet firmly established. Unlike now, he not only had the leisure to look at the Iron King who rebelled against his brother's rule, but also was not afraid of the commander rushing in. He even felt quite relieved, because he knew many of the thoughts of the man in front of him. The war failed. After the two sides met, Renly's first words made Balon Greyjoy pause, and then he sat on the chair and unconsciously paid more attention to the boy in front of him who looked very young. The Iron Fleet was led into a trap in the Fairy Island Strait. The River Fleet went north, and Stannis Baratheon went south from behind. The two sides attacked, and our army was defeated. His tone remained calm and there was no sense of urgency, as if he was talking about something extremely normal. However, the meaning behind this sentence made Balon unconsciously clench the wine glass offered by the drowned man. The biggest reliance of the Iron Islands in this rebellion is naturally their excellent and huge fleet, and the cruel but kind sea of the Ironmen. The sea is my moat, and it will bury the enemy who dares to invade. Balon Greyjoy declared this when he burned the Lannister fleet in one fell swoop. He believed that relying on this moat, even if Westeros had sufficient logistical supplies and manpower, they could still win in the Iron Islands. However, the battle situation not long ago gave him a direct blow. The Iron Fleet, formed by the combined strength of the entire island, was defeated, and there were only a few survivors. The Iron Islands' maritime power was basically abolished. It would take at least 7 or 8 years to recover. Not only that, without the fleet, his moat can now be passed through by the enemy at will. At present, nothing can be seen, but soon, the enemies of Westeros will inevitably emerge from the end of the vast ocean and land on the islands. offense, defense, familiarity, and unfamiliarity. After the fleet was abolished, the Ironmen directly became the defenders. The geographical advantages and human harmony brought by guarding their homes have certain advantages, but if the strength of the two sides is very different, then this defense is doomed to fail even though the defensive war has not yet begun. When Balon learned that the fleet was defeated, he had already recognized this, and he had no way to deal with it. Because this is a hard power gap, without the advantage of the ocean, they simply cannot hit the united behemoth. He was so helpless about it that when the news came back, he stayed in his room all night without drinking anything, thinking about the war, the future, and how to recover a little. He couldn't think of any solution, but his hair turned grey. So when he heard that a miracle suddenly appeared on Old Wake Island, he took a boat and ran here, hoping that the boy in front of him could bring some miracles. The first sentence made Baron more confident, because although the result of the war had already appeared, the news had not spread, and the other party was able to know it now, which was obviously not something that could be done by ordinary means, if he had other unique powers. However, the next sentence of the Son of God in front of him made Baron's heart sink to the bottom. I can't change the result that has already happened, and I can't influence the war that will invade soon. The childish voice answered his thoughts, as if he had predicted the future, and the tone was full of solemnity. An elephant can easily crush a hound to death, but it can do nothing to an ant crawling on it. The power of the gods can do many things beyond the imagination of ordinary people, but it also has many limitations. Otherwise, the great drowned god would have let the Iron Islands conquer the entire Westeros long ago. This decisive refusal disappointed Balon, but it seemed to be true when he thought about it. However, even the gods couldn't do anything about it, so what else could they do? Balon didn't think about it, because it would only make him more powerless. He didn't plan to stay here any longer. Although he still had many doubts in his heart, it didn't matter now. He thought that when the army of Westeros arrived, it would be the time of his death. He was going to die, so what doubts were worth paying attention to? So less than 2 minutes after entering the tent, he stood up happily, bowed slightly to the boy, and was about to turn around and leave, but the other party's next sentence made him pause. You will not die. Baratheon will not let you die. This statement sounded a bit strange, because Balon had never said such words. However, Balon was quite familiar with the mysterious Son of God who seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. He was not surprised, but he did not agree with this statement. I'm the initiator of the rebellion, and I deceived the Green King on the Iron Throne. If I don't die, how can this rebellion be quelled? The Iron Throne is the Iron Throne, and Baratheon is Baratheon. The Son of God's words made Balon think, and then he sat back and listened quietly. As a unified king, you, the instigator of the rebellion, deserve to die. Renly said, but just as you speculated, when you first started the rebellion, do you think King Robert's throne is stable? Balon thought for a moment and said, Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, by relying on the alliance between the North, the Riverlands, and the Vale, but this alliance itself is not perfect. The Tully family has a weak control over the Riverlands. During the Usurpers' Rebellion, they did not gather many lords of the Riverlands to join the war. Some even stood on the side of the Targaryens. The North is vast, but the population is sparse and the mobilization capacity is insufficient. The Arryn family in the Vale is stronger than these two, but not much stronger. The decision to marry the Lannisters is very wise. The Lannisters have a strong control over the West, and with the combined efforts of the other families, they are enough to stabilize the Iron Chair under the usurpers' buttocks, but it is not so much the marriage that maintains the relationship between the two families, but it is better to say that it is the next generation of heirs to the Iron Throne. So before this heir appears, the usurper's throne is still not stable. As he spoke, he sighed. I thought the Reach would not respond to the call of the usurper, or even if they did, they would not be so enthusiastic. Wouldn't it be more beneficial for them to let my Iron Islands fleet weaken the Westerlands and the usurper's power? He seemed a little confused about this, but Renly had no intention of discussing this topic. After hearing this, he concluded, so the usurper Robert nominally ruled the entire Westeros, but in fact he had no control over the major territories under his command, and he had almost no control, whether it was the Westerlands or the Reach. That's right. Balon nodded. So, for the Reach and the Westerlands. Is the existence of the Iron Islands good or bad? Renly reminded him. For the Stormlands and the Crownland controlled by Baratheon, what impact does the existence of the Iron Islands have? The latter question is very simple. There is no impact, because the Stormlands and the Crownland have nothing to do with the Iron Islands. And the former question is more obvious. Of course it is bad. The three parties are across the sea, and have been enemies for thousands of years. Balon understood after hearing this, but he still didn't have the confidence to survive this war. The usurper certainly needs the existence of the Iron Islands, but it is limited to the Iron Islands. But if it is a loose Iron Islands, what's the point of him having the Iron Islands? Renly asked back, and who can be more in line with this expectation than you, the king of the Iron Islands with high prestige, and who has been conquered by him once? This is just a certain consideration. Balon Greyjoy shook his head. Not long after he ascended the throne, I started a rebellion. If he doesn't deal with me, what will others think? In the early days of the rebellion against the Targaryens, 3 nobles in the Stormlands stood on the opposite side of the usurper and opposed him as the feudal lord. After being defeated, the usurper did not chop off the heads of those leading nobles, but instead reused them. Renly said, you can't look at the King Baratheon with ordinary thinking. He is more like a warrior than a king. At the same time, one factor is very favorable to you. That is, you have not sworn allegiance to the Baratheon dynasty. In a sense, you are still on the Targaryen side. This made Baron think, so, this war is not a rebellion. It was strange for the initiator of the war to say this, but neither side felt strange. Renly nodded after hearing this, so I said, you will not die, or rather, you have the possibility of survival. Thinking about this carefully, Baron unconsciously pursed his lips, and then the other party's words attracted his attention again. So what after you survive? After you survive, what should you do? Thank you to the book friend Deojan Feijan for the 10,000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Heath Ice Tea, the book friend Scrodinger's Cat, and the book friend Elminster 12,345 for the 1,000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Zyanatang 246, the book friend who strives to become a top student, the book friend who surpasses his own setting, and the book friend 150,823,011,430,479 for the 100 reward. Chapter 178, Atavism and Ryan. From the current war to past history, from the establishment of the Targaryen dynasty to the results of each war launched by the Iron Islands in the past 300 years, from the resources of the islands to geographical and economic issues. The conversation in the sealskin tent lasted for a long time, until the sky darkened, and Balon Greyjoy, the king of the Iron Islands, opened the tent and walked out. After taking a deep breath of the air with the smell of the sea, he turned and bowed to the tent, and then stepped away with a hurried step. Renly in the tent didn't care much about this. After all, he just wanted the Iron Islands to be more honest and submissive, and not to go out and rob all day long. But the premise of this honesty is naturally to be able to eat well and wear warm clothes, so he gave a few suggestions by the way. Thinking about it, Renly took a sip of the weak tea in the cup, his expression thoughtful. The previous conversation was not entirely about the Iron Islands. Later, Balon also mentioned a personal confusion with him, that is, the blessing of the power of the drowned god, that is, the seed of the ancient road in Balon's body. A rebellion to restore the ancient road seemed to provide a lot of nutrients to the seeds in Baron's body, so that in addition to the feedback power, it also bred a new ability, or in other words, it made Baron's body change a little bit. Something similar to webbed feet grew between his toes. This situation surprised Renly, but he had no idea about it. At the same time, in order to keep it mysterious, he did not dare to look at it more, but just claimed that this situation was a normal phenomenon. So Baron was relieved. However, Renly could not ignore the emergence of this phenomenon. He suspected that it was because of the feedback of the seeds of the ancient road that Baron's body had a reversion phenomenon. Although in his memory, people were all transformed from monkeys, but there was no such saying in this world. In other words, on many islands in this world, there are legends that the local islanders have mermaid blood. Renly even heard that many people in the Three Sisters Islands of the Valley have webbed feet. I don't know if it is the same thing as Baron. Thinking about it, he shook his head and got up to pack up. Proposing suggestions was just a side job. The main result of his conversation was that a ship would quietly dock tonight, and Renly would take that ship to Westeros. That's right, he was going to leave tonight. Renly had no attachment to the identity of the son of the drowned god, and he would not stay any longer if he could leave earlier. Although Balon Greyjoy was puzzled by the idea of the son of the drowned god secretly leaving the Iron Islands, he still decided to help. On the one hand, Balon did not think that the son of god did not know that he was the son of god, as the drowned people did before. Or Balon believed that the son of god was the son of god, and even if he left the Iron Islands, he still could not hide this fact. So what was the problem of leaving the islands temporarily? Anyway, the son of the drowned god would always return to the Iron Islands. After all, the Iron Islands were the only ones in the world who believed in the drowned god. How far could he, the son of god, go even if he left? On the other hand, although he welcomed the existence of the son of the drowned god, he obviously did not want any son of god king to appear in the islands. The Iron Islands have one leader, but the drowned men want to create another one. What are they trying to do? Seize power. Want to restore the short-lived drowned kingdom 300 years ago. In a sense, Balon is on a united front with Renly, so he agreed to send a ship to pick up Renly and send him to Westeros. At the same time, although he was curious about why the son of god wanted to go to the Greenland that was not under the jurisdiction of the drowned god, he didn't ask much, because Renly didn't explain. There must be a reason, which may be related to the gods. It's better for him, a mortal, not to get involved in such things rashly. After all, his own affairs are in a mess and he can't manage them. Of course, Balon still asked if he needed him to send someone to follow him, but Renly refused. However, he gladly accepted the claim that he would provide him with some money necessary for walking in the human world. It's a pity that I can't do it all at once. In the tent, after packing up all his things, Renly sighed secretly. The defeat in the naval war caused the Iron Islands to completely lose control of the sea area south of the islands. Now the southern sea area is full of enemies, and the ships of the Iron Islands dare not pass through there, so they can only send Renly to the sea bordering the north of the islands, either the north or the Riverlands. Needless to say, the north is the farthest place from Highgarden. Now it is winter, and it is probably freezing cold there, so the only choice is the Riverlands. This is quite troublesome, because after arriving in the Riverlands, he still has to travel a long way. Renly hesitated for a while, because in addition to letting the people of the Iron Islands send him away, he can actually wait until his cheap brother Robert arrives in the Iron Islands and directly join the friendly forces. In fact, this is what he originally planned. It's just that war is simple to say, but it is very troublesome to mobilize in practice. Even if the naval power of the Iron Islands is abolished now, it will probably take a long time for them to reach the islands. And if he really did that, he couldn't explain why he was here. At the same time, as the son of the drowned god, who was very popular in the archipelago, anyone who was interested could easily find out what Renly had done here, and then. So Renly decided to leave tonight. In fact, he didn't have much to pack. The main thing was himself, and the secondary things were 4 shells containing ancient road seeds, a bronze ring with 3 remaining uses, an air cat that had been harassing him recently, and a few ordinary winter clothes prepared by the drowned people. After counting, that was all. After roughly packing a bag, he pretended to sleep and extinguished the brazier in the tent and lay in bed for a long time until it was almost midnight, when it became quite quiet outside. Renly left a line of words on the ground, then lifted up a loose corner of the tent that had been reserved before and hurried towards the coastline not far away under the cover of night when no one noticed. There were night watchers around the beach, but these drowners obviously had no relevant experience. Using bonfires to illuminate the area at night greatly affected their vision, so they saw the dark area very vaguely. In addition, Renly had already had an escape plan and had a clear understanding of the distribution of the night watchers. Therefore, although the process was not smooth, he finally successfully reached the end of the coast. However, before Renly took off his upper body clothes and jumped into the sea, he suddenly heard footsteps approaching. Looking back, a thin figure of a drowner came into view. Lion. Renly narrowed his eyes. Where do you want to go, Lord Son of God? The other party asked softly after approaching, and his ordinary thin face looked hazy and illusory under the cover of the night. Instead of asking me where I want to go, Renly said, sitting cross-legged on a reef below him. Why don't we discuss how you got here? I heard some noises, so as far as I know, you weren't on duty outside my tent tonight. Renly interrupted with a sneer. Don't tell me you just got up to pee. No. The thin drowned man whispered. I just couldn't sleep. Really? Renly didn't comment, and then suddenly asked. Who are you? I'm Ryan. You're not Ryan. Renly interrupted. You claim to be from Lonely Light Island, but I sent people to investigate there, and found that there is no such person as Ryan on Lonely Light Island, so, who are you? What is your purpose? The other party was silent after hearing this. There are only 2 chapters today, friends. It's not that I intentionally interrupted the chapter. It's really because I went to the dentist yesterday and didn't write the 3rd chapter. To be honest, I have to go to the dentist today, but I will try my best to update it 3 times tomorrow. Chapter 179 Questions and Answers. At midnight, the damp and cold beach edge, the atmosphere remained dull. The boy sitting on the reef just stared at the tall and thin drowned man standing not far away, and the other party also stared at him motionlessly, expressionless. From your behavior, you are observing me. After a moment of silence, seeing that the other party had no intention of speaking, Renly said again, and this kind of observation is completely different from those drowned man's. At the same time, before being found by those drowned man, I was followed by a silver-haired woman. That's what they said. When talking about the silver-haired woman, Renly paid special attention to the expression of the person in front of him, but still couldn't see anything. Whether it's that woman or you, it seems that you can accurately find my location. Renly said, raised his hand, and grabbed the air, frowning as if he had grabbed something. I can probably guess that it's because of this cat, because this kind of thing has never happened before. The air cat in his hand obviously didn't understand his identity as a traitor. After being caught, it still shook its body and put its fleshy claws on Renly's arm to show closeness, so Renly let go of it and ignored it. So I thought at first that you and the silver-haired woman were in the same group, and your purpose was to observe me. Therefore, you couldn't let me leave the Iron Islands easily, so the group of drowned men came to my door. But he paused, and his fingers seemed to fiddle with the bronze ring hanging around his neck unintentionally. Later I found out that maybe you are not 2 people, but 1. These words finally made the other party's expression react, and he seemed to be a little surprised for a moment. A woman and a man seem to be 2 people, why can't they be 1? Renly on the side said to himself, you never participate when the drowned people bathe in the sea, and no one has seen you peeing in front of others. And since you appeared, the woman has disappeared without a trace. Are you a faceless man? Can you change your appearance at will? That's all? The other party asked. His voice became a little hoarse. Can you determine that I'm a woman based on these? Of course there is more. Renly smiled and said, but I can't tell you the rest. It's a secret. Secrets? The other party murmured with a complicated tone. You have so many secrets. The emotion of these words was obviously a bit abnormal. At the same time, due to some new evolved characteristics of his own, Renly felt a faint sense of sadness, which made him frown involuntarily, but he didn't need to consider why he felt this way, because the other party had already taken action. The tall and thin Ryan standing there suddenly raised his hand to touch and stroke his left cheek, and then, under Renly's expected gaze, he pinched his fingers on the edge of his cheek and lifted it outwards. A soft flesh-colored mask was thus pinched in the other's hand, and the face under the mask had become very beautiful. Because it was dark, Renly didn't feel anything special at first, but after taking a closer look at the slender woman not far away, his originally calm expression was unconsciously startled, and then his pupils shrank suddenly. Her forehead was smooth, her features were delicate, and her long black hair fluttering in the sea breeze made her look a little different, but her oval face was quite familiar to Renly. Rhaenys? The boy's surprised voice made the woman not far away smile, but she did not stop her movements. She raised her right hand and pulled at her fair neck while looking at Renly with interest. A silver necklace was pulled off by her, and her beautiful face was in a trance for a moment, and then suddenly disappeared, or rather, half of it suddenly disappeared. In the cold wind at night, the slender figure standing on the beach still had a delicate and fair face, and the look of being tossed by her hair was very moving, but a tangled and ugly burnt scar appeared on her right cheek, connecting the eyebrows to the edge of the lips, setting off her beautiful left cheek, as if it were a combination of an angel and a demon, so weird and discordant. Long time no see. She finally spoke. Her voice was still hoarse, but there was no trace of the smile she once had in her tone. In an instant, countless questions came to his mind, but he didn't know where to start. After a moment of silence, Renly couldn't help but say, "Aren't you already dead?" The woman smiled faintly. "You are so smart, you should be able to guess what the truth is." "That's Sister Ada?" Renly said while looking at the mask in his hand. "That's right. Then your face. I accidentally burned it." The woman touched the right half of her face and smiled nonchalantly. "After so many years, I've gotten used to it." As she spoke, she scanned Renly's current immature appearance with interest. "Is this your other identity? Or the real you?" "It's another identity, but it's also me," Renly answered hesitantly, and then looked at the mask in the other's hand that was floating in the wind. "How did you become a faceless man?" "I learned it when I was traveling in the free trade cities. This ability is very useful," the woman said, and put the necklace in her hand back to her neck, so that the right half of her face, which originally looked quite ugly, quietly changed, and finally merged harmoniously with the left side. "At the same time, I also learned a little magic. Free trade cities. Faceless men." Renly's mind was complicated after hearing this, but he didn't think about it too much, because he was still confused. "Then how did you find me? And how old are you? You said your name was Renly in the Dawn Desert. This name is rare, so I was able to find you. At the same time, I think you know better than me why I'm here." Rhaenys whispered. "As for my appearance, I don't know why I have changed back to this appearance now. I only know that it is related to Rhea. At the beginning, I lured the dragon away for revenge. I wanted to put the blame on my sister, but I didn't expect to irritate Rhea, and then everything changed. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was you at the time." She looked both apologetic and quite calm, which made Renly speechless. Blame. Ignorance is not to blame, and it was still an acquaintance of his, an acquaintance who resurrected from the dead. To be honest, he still feels quite happy now. Don't take it seriously. Being burned to death alive, only those who know the pain will know. And there is also, what happened next? Renly suddenly asked, "What happened next? You want to ask about Rhea?" Rhaenys asked. Seeing Renly nod, she seemed a little hesitant and a little sad. "I'm not sure about Rhea, but I think she may have died." Dead. Renly was stunned when he heard this. Thank you to the book friend Sankian Mengi for the 11,000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Tanbushi King for the 2,000 reward, and thank you to the book friend Zyanatang 246 for the 100 reward. Chapter 180 Rhaenys. The conversation on the beach did not continue, because there were many people drowning here, and it was not a suitable place for communication. At the same time, a small boat came to pick people up on the sea level, shrouded in darkness soon, so the two stopped talking temporarily and started running. Finally, they successfully arrived at a ship anchored in the deep sea. Under the dim yellow lamp hanging from the ceiling, the narrow cabin swayed as the ship sailed, and the smell of burnt grease filled the air, but it did not prevent the two from reminiscing about the past. After returning from Dawn, I lived in King's Landing for a while. Later, because of a quarrel with Egan, I went to the Free Trade City. Why? Of course, it was because of someone who left without saying goodbye. The woman sitting at the table had returned to her usual appearance as a drowned person before. Her glances and smiles looked quite strange, but her words were still that hoarse female voice. "At first I thought you were a faceless man, so I went to the House of Black and White in Bravos, which is the headquarters of the Faceless Men. Later, I didn't find you, but I became one of them." She said this without any embarrassment or shyness, and seemed calm and composed, which made Renly suddenly realize that the memory might be more than a year ago for him, but for the person in front of him, it has been more than 40 years. For more than 40 years, the world has changed drastically, and what has remained unchanged? What happened next? He couldn't help asking. Later, because of Rhea, I returned to Westeros, and because Enos found clues, I faked my death and escaped to become Adder. You also know what happened after that. The young drowned man said, raising his hand to touch his right cheek. Rhea's origin is very strange. She was hatched from a dragon egg in our family. I was too close to her when she hatched, so I was burned. You know, when she came out, her whole body was on fire. There were always strange things happening to her body, either suddenly getting smaller or growing up. I was very worried at first, but I finally took her back to King's Landing, and these things never happened again. Renly frowned when he heard this. So she is really dead? I'm not sure. Rhaena shook her head and said, after you died, Rhea became unable to communicate. I followed her across half of Westeros, and finally watched her whole body catch fire. When I got close, she had been burned to ashes. But I think, since she has such a strange ability, maybe this is just an appearance? Renly was silent when he heard this. The other party did not speak again. The atmosphere in the cabin became dull because of this, until Renly raised his eyes and looked at the other party again. What is her relationship with me? I'm not sure. Rhaena said, but she looks a lot like you. I mean, a lot like you back then. As she said that, she didn't seem to want to immerse herself in this topic, so she changed her topic and said, then I suddenly appeared here. I don't know why, but I guess it has something to do with you. You can enter our world, so I think you can certainly bring people here. Renly was not sure if what the other party said was correct, because he didn't know how much the birth of the Chaos Mark had to do with his golden finger, but this was not important at the moment. I will find out about Rhea. He said a little annoyed. Even if she died, I have to find out why, and maybe she is not dead. I hope you are right. Rhaena murmured in response, and then changed the subject, breaking the current solemn atmosphere. What about you now? Why did you become a child? Or to save people? Who are you? Where are you from? Don't you think I look like this? Renly looked up at the other party. I find it hard to believe that I would fall in love with a child, so I don't think so. Renly felt a little strange when Renly said this with a manly face, but he obviously couldn't answer the other party's question, so he asked back, what about you? What are you going to do? Originally, I planned to ask if I could go back after finding you, but I thought about it on the way, and there was nothing to miss there. But I still want to see you, want to find out the truth, and then. She hesitated to say this, and Renly suggested, if you haven't thought about it, you can go back to Highgarden with me. You said you can do magic? I happen to be interested in this. Hearing this, the other party looked at him, and after a flickering moment, he nodded. Before I find something I'm interested in, it's okay. Renly smiled when he heard this, and then he suddenly asked, that church behind this topic is a series of questions. Renly thinks that no matter what, he should solve this problem now, so as not to drag it out and make it awkward when getting along in the future. The other party's answer was not unexpected. Don't worry. It's been more than 40 years. We've already let go of what we should have let go of. She chuckled as she spoke. When I was young, I was too impulsive and didn't care about the consequences. This caused me a lot of pain, but that's all in the past. Now that I think about it, it's interesting, but also too naive. I'm curious about the history of this world. Maybe you can help me with this? Renly was silent for a moment, then nodded. Which period do you want to ask about? Of course my own. Your own. Your own history ended in Dawn. What about after I died in Dawn? What did Egon and Visenya do? It's basically not much different from what you've seen, except for some details, such as the birth of the King's Guard. Renly replied, and then began to concentrate on explaining to the other party. The boy's crisp words kept echoing in the narrow cabin, which sounded quite pleasant, as if a thorough song was constantly lingering in the ears. Sitting opposite the boy, Rhaena propped her cheek with one hand, looking at his focused expression quietly. She seemed to be smiling and listening quietly, but in fact her mind was in a mess. Let it go? How could she let it go? After she made that embarrassing decision, he suddenly left without saying goodbye, leaving nothing behind, except a dragon egg she gave him, not even a simple goodbye. How could she let it go? She was unwilling and angry. She went back to Dawn to investigate and went to the north, to find the green seer who was said to know everything. After finding no clues, she went to the free trade cities to find the faceless ones. For this, she even joined them in person. In addition to enduring arduous training, she wanted to observe with her own eyes whether there was the person she wanted to find among those who were said to be nameless and had no identity that could change in 1,000 ways. Because of this, her husband fell out with her, her son was no longer close to her, and everything that had once been gone. Her whole life changed because of this. Even though she was disfigured, she had to endure the disobedient Rhea dangling in front of her, just because she felt that she might have clues, or that person would come to her one day in the future. He did come to her door, after she was no longer young, and had long since turned waiting into a habit, when she was blinded by hatred. Then, what was waiting for? Recalling everything that happened that day, she looked at the hand she had placed under her body. After washing off the camouflage potion, the hand seemed to have returned to its original appearance, white and beautiful, with round fingertips and shiny long nails. However, when she stared closely, she found that the hand gradually showed an old posture. The white, tight and blue-veined back of the hand was wrinkled, the beautiful body gradually withered, and the fingernails seemed to be drained of all moisture, as if all the water was drained. Everything she saw that day had changed, including herself. Her appearance returned to the most beautiful appearance in her life. Her mentality also became much younger, but aging did not leave her far away. Instead, it haunted her all the time, making her feel that it was difficult to walk sometimes. Calculate, how many days do I have left? Glancing at the young man's funny appearance, who was still explaining things like a little adult, Rhaenys couldn't help but smile. That's it, she thought. Chapter 181,000 Faces and Magic. As the captain of the Wrathful Hammer, Beryl did not know the identities of the father and son on the ship. Due to King Baron's previous order, he did not dare to ask more. However, the captain felt that the father and son were very strange. They stayed in the cabin all day and did not come out. The boy even shaved his head the day after boarding the ship. The boy's father did not look like someone who could give birth to such a beautiful child. From all the signs, Beryl guessed that the father and son, or the boy, might be related to someone who was very famous in the archipelago recently. This guess made him feel a little nervous, but he thought it would be better for him to pretend that he knew nothing, so as not to cause trouble. But in fact, the mission of the Wrathful Hammer was not just to send the father and son to the Riverlands. The main mission of this ship was actually to go to the waters of Heijiang City near the Riverlands. There was the second battlefield between the Iron Islands and the Greenlands, which was led by King Balin's brother Euron. But when the news of the defeat on Fair Isle came back, King Balin ordered the withdrawal of the troops, but Euron, who was quite notorious in the islands, refused to return, and claimed that Seaward was about to be captured. King Balin was very angry about this, so he sent the Hammer of Fury to Seaward to urge him. Beryl didn't know if he could complete this task. As a native of Pike, he was actually a little afraid of Euron, the second son of the Greyjoy family. I hope everything goes well, Beryl murmured in a low voice, noticing that there was something wrong with the sea breeze around the deck. Beryl couldn't help but look up at the sky, and the gradually gloomy look made him frown. The weather at sea changes so suddenly, it's really unpredictable. The first mate beside him sighed. There was still plenty of sunshine this morning. The sea is not always like this. Beryl replied, maybe the god of storms is about to target us. It looks a little bit off. The first mate said indifferently, our Iron fleet encountered a storm a while ago. I don't believe our ship will be unlucky enough to encounter it again. Besides, you see, we have a big shot on our ship. The god of storms can't do anything to us. I don't know which big shot it is. Captain Beryl glanced at his rough first mate. Tell me, who is the big shot? His eyes seemed to be intimidating and full of warnings, which made the first mate shut his mouth angrily, but then he muttered again, anyway, I don't believe we will encounter a storm. The captain and others were discussing the weather over there, and here Renly was also looking at the gloomy weather conditions outside through the narrow window of the cabin with a frown. If there's a storm outside, don't forget to hold me tight, he reminded the people around him. Like before. The words of this man made Renly feel a little awkward, and then he found that his expression seemed to be full of solemnity. What did you feel? Magic? God? Rhaenys? who was still disguised as a man, looked down at him. "Are you being targeted?" "I don't know." Renly frowned and replied, "But I always encounter storms in the sea." In ancient times, the Durrandon family had some connection with the god of storms, and Baratheon inherited the blood of the Durrandon family. Rhaena said, thinking of some things she had learned recently, and couldn't help but say, if Orys Baratheon knew that his descendants would usurp the throne of our family, he would probably jump out of his grave in anger. Orys Baratheon is the ancestor of the Baratheon family and the closest right-hand man of Aegon the Conqueror. There are even rumors that Orys is the illegitimate brother of Aegon the Conqueror. He has served the Conqueror diligently all his life. He can be said to be a very loyal person. Time will change everything. Renly replied, "Even dragons are extinct, let alone loyalty?" "Really?" Rhaenys muttered, then changed the subject. "I don't know why the situation outside is like that, but maybe before this ship sinks, I should teach you some magic knowledge." "Also theology knowledge?" Renly asked tentatively. "Yes." Rhaenys nodded, "except for the Valyrian magic that can no longer be used. All the magic currently circulating is related to the gods. The kind that requires devout belief. Only sincere service can communicate with the gods and then show power that mortals cannot control." Renly's interest dropped greatly after hearing this. "Then forget it. I have no intention of believing in gods." This made Rhaenys look at him strangely. "You don't believe in the 7 gods? How did you become a?" She reacted before she finished her words, and then rubbed the boy's newly shaved head with amusement. "They thought you were the son of the drowned god. You don't think I am, do you?" Renly said as he shook off the other's hand that was touching his forehead, frowned and asked with some displeasure, "Who can do such a big scene?" "That kind of scene is indeed rare, but I don't think you are the son of the drowned god." Rhaena said, "Gods are not human beings, and it is impossible for them to have sons." As she spoke, she looked at Renly curiously, but did not intend to continue asking questions, but continued the previous topic. "I believe in the thousand-faced god. The thousand-faced god has thousands of magics, but the most fundamental one is this." As she spoke, she took off the mask on her face and handed it to Renly. "Is this a human skin mask?" Renly asked, and after taking it, he felt that the mask felt like a human face, and he could even feel the temperature faintly. "It is indeed made of human faces, but it also uses magic. Only people from the House of Black and White can make it. I only took out a few before I left there." Rhaenys explained, "It preserves the remaining will of the dead. When you put on the mask, you can clearly feel it, and you can also use this to communicate with the gods that the dead served when they were alive, and then exchange power for a price. So I said that the thousand-faced god has 1,000 kinds of magic. Can this kind of exchange be forged?" Renly thought. "You can say that," but she was forced to interrupt before she finished her words, because a crow suddenly landed outside the cabin window and stood on the windowsill. The dark eyes looked at the Tahazy people in the window and seemed to be shining. "Skin changer, green seer." Seeing this, Rhaenys quietly reached for a glass bottle in her waist pocket, but the crow tilted its head to look at her and then flapped its wings and ran away. Looking at the direction, it was obviously the Iron Islands. We left just in time. Watching the crow fly away until it turned into a black dot, Rhaenys quietly loosened the pocket on her waist and at the same time lowered her head and said to Renly solemnly, "But not fast enough. Do you think it went to find me?" Renly asked, touching his chin. "I'm not sure." The person next to him shook his head, "But apart from you, I don't think there is anything else in the Iron Islands that can attract it." Renly didn't say anything, but glanced down at his left wrist. After the divine fire was ignited, he suspected that some evil spirits would come to the door, so he left in a hurry, and what he saw now was indeed the case. However, thinking of the crow flapping its wings and leaving without much hesitation, Renly felt a lot more relieved. There was only a wooden wall between them, but the so-called Green Prophet didn't find anything, which already explained something. After all, this is just a low magic world, he thought to himself. And the mark on his wrist was obviously beyond the normal range of this world. Another chapter has been added, so there are still 16 chapters to go. Chapter 182 Plans and Accidents. Renly believed that the storm was inevitable because the phenomena outside were exactly the same as his previous experiences, silently revealing that the curse residue in his body had recurred. However, just as they made the corresponding preparations and waited silently, no storm appeared that day, and the next day, when the dawn was bright, they saw that the dark clouds covering the sky had quietly dissipated. Why is this happening? Standing in front of the window and staring at everything, Renly was a little puzzled. Counting everything that happened yesterday, it seemed that nothing special happened, except a crow flying by, so the storm, that should have appeared, was interrupted by that crow. Or was everything yesterday just a normal phenomenon, not a curse? In general, this is a good thing. Although he was puzzled, he was still happy to see it. It seems that the curse on his body has a cooling time. There was no sign of recurrence in the following days, until they were safely sent to land by the captain of the Hammer of Fury. The destination of the hammer was still farther away, at the foot of the city of Sea Forest, but that didn't mean Renly and his companions had to follow it. So after waving goodbye to the receding brig, Renly, carrying a bag of gold dragons given to him by Balon Greyjoy and a tall and thin man who looked like a bamboo pole, set out on the road back to Highgarden. The initial route is to cross the sea wall city, where the war is still going on, then follow the path along the coastal edge to Lannister Port, and finally follow the coastal road there to Highgarden. The bold boy in an ordinary and inconspicuous grey cotton coat and linen pants said to the bamboo pole beside him, "You can ride a horse, right? Is riding a horse more difficult than riding a dragon?" The other party's soft question made Renly touch his forehead, but after hearing that the other party was just teasing and actually had a relaxed expression, he understood that this person actually knew how to ride a horse, so he nodded and continued to remind, "If you meet someone, we are a father and son who fled from Sea Wall City. Although this matter is not very important, don't reveal it. Don't worry, the faceless men are much more difficult than you think." Rhaenys glanced at the boy while speaking. "If necessary, I can be anyone." This guy's indeed not the guy who looked mature, but actually knew nothing. Renly nodded, and then continued on his way honestly. The landing time was a sunny afternoon, and the location was a beach covered with barren rocks. Gradually walking deeper into the land, they passed a low pine forest, and finally landed in an abandoned village, when the sky was dark. It is said that, whenever the Iron Men invaded, the sea border city would ring a huge bronze bell, to call on the surrounding people, to take refuge in the castle. In the mud house, the two had already lit a bonfire for heating. The dim light cast a hazy shadow of one large and one small, and the green smoke from the firewood also made the air in this farmhouse quite pungent. "Everyone who wanted to come here has taken refuge." The boy glanced at the other person while speaking, and found that his expression was much more serious than before, and couldn't help wondering, "What's wrong? This place is too close to the battlefield." When there were no outsiders, Rhaenys would speak in her original voice, so Renly felt very awkward. "Indeed, but I don't think the Ironborn would be willing to send people out to sweep the surrounding villages in the current situation. It's the end of the war now, and they don't have much time left." As he said this, he saw that the other party's expression still didn't seem to ease, so he couldn't help but make a joke. "Besides, with you, a great magician, here, why should we be afraid of those stupid mortals?" This made Rhaenys glance at him lightly. Magic can't be used casually. It takes time to prepare and it also costs a certain amount of money. As she said this, she frowned unconsciously. Magic is more difficult to cast here than before, and many of them can no longer be used. Renly had no say in this, so he just shrugged. "In short, I think there will be no accidents if we hide here. Regardless of the war situation, the Ironborn don't have the time to sweep a village that looks like it has already been swept." This statement was not perfect, but it was quite confident. Unfortunately, accidents always come suddenly and do not follow common sense. That night, the two men who had turned off the engine hid in the fur cloaks they had prepared in advance to rest. As a result, relying on his sensitive hearing, Renly suddenly heard an abnormal sound of horse hooves approaching quickly. This made him wake up from his half-sleep and half-awake state. He stood up and looked. Not far away, Rhaenys had also been awakened and was looking over. After the two looked at each other, they quietly walked to the window of the house and looked out. Then they saw a line of 3 knights rushing past the road in the center of the village in the moonlight. They were obviously running away. This made Renly secretly feel a little bad. But they did not act rashly, but stayed quietly in this inconspicuous mud house and carefully observed the outside world. Not long after, the appearance of the pursuers came into view. It was a group of iron people, also riding horses, but they obviously did not look as skilled as the previous three. But they were not slow either. It took only a few dozen seconds from entering the sight to disappearing in the distance. The whole process of chasing and escaping seemed to take only 1 or 2 minutes. The two people who were awakened were no longer sleepy at this time, but they seemed to be still safe. No accidents? Renly was a little embarrassed by Renly's question. Isn't it that there are no accidents? If you sleep deeply, you won't even notice that this happened. The other party did not respond, but turned around and began to pack up. Seeing this, Renly also got busy. Being chased by the Iron Men, he must be an important person, but this has nothing to do with them. It's just that no matter whether those Iron Men can catch up with their target, there is a high possibility that they will pass by here when they return. If the two stay here, they will be exposed, so they must move as soon as possible. This does not need to be said explicitly, they can think of it naturally. But seeing the skilled appearance of the person next to him, and some conversations on the way, Renly felt disappointed. He could not match the person next to him with arenas in his memory. The former one was cunning, lively, and active, but the one in front of him was very dull. Time can change everything, he thought, then shook his head, ignoring the melancholy that suddenly grew in his heart, and quickly packed up his cloak, lint, oilcloth, dagger, etc., and then followed her decisively out of the door and left the village. Although it was different from the expected route, they still carefully avoided the direction of the group's advance and hurried on their way under the hazy moonlight. However, it seemed that their luck began to deteriorate after landing. Before they had traveled for long, a knight who was on the way made the two of them change their faces instantly. One of the three runaways. The other party also obviously discovered the existence of the two, so he shouted, "Run, there are monsters." He didn't need to say it, the two had already turned around and ran towards a bush behind. But why did this sound a bit strange? With this thought in mind, Renly heard a strange wolf howl behind him and couldn't help turning his head to take a look, and then he saw a werewolf. Or, werewolf. Thank you to Mealy Kyang Woody for the 5,000 yuan reward. Thank you to Heath Ice-G for the 1,000 yuan reward. Thank you to the Peerless Barker for the 500 yuan reward. Thank you to Ao Shu Zeshang, Xianting Difu Renjian and Ru Zheng for the 100 yuan reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, Free Nights. A quick glance showed that the monster covered in white hair was very clear under the moonlight, with a bloody and ferocious wolf mouth, scarlet eyes, and a strange appearance of running on all fours like a wolf, but with a human body. The one who yelled a warning at them had already galloped past on horseback, and the two people on the roadside had no time to dodge or hide, and were directly seen by the monster. Renly narrowed his eyes, and the tall and thin man next to him saw that he could not hide, so he rushed forward instead of retreating, and a sharp dagger appeared in his hand at some point. "Wait," Renly shouted from behind, but the other party who was concentrating did not seem to hear it, or even if she heard it, she ignored it. As she rushed forward quickly, facing the monster's roaring mouth, she quickly turned around and dodged, and the dagger in her hand pierced into the monster's jaw with a sizzling sound. Her movements were very swift, and she looked like a dragonfly lightly skimming the surface of a lake. However, her attack did not work, or rather, the situation that should have been fatal did not cause serious injuries to the monster as usual. Although the dagger penetrated deeply into the throat close to the wolf's jaw, it only made the monster's raw hoarse and weak, and did not hinder its movement at all. Instead, it seemed to be enraged, and swung its back, and its claws on the ground suddenly raised up, to scratch at the tall and thin man. Renly reacted quickly and narrowly avoided the attack, but the next grab by the monster immediately afterwards directly tore several gaps in the clothes on her arm, leaving a bloody scar on the surface of her skin. The battle lasted for a breath or two and reached the next stage. The monster that should have been seriously injured was jumping around, but the tall and thin man who had received a minor attack on his arm seemed to be affected by it. He was slow to react to the monster biting him and finally had to roll sideways to avoid it. However, this reaction seemed particularly unwise in front of the monster on all fours. However, the situation did not continue to deteriorate because Renly had already rushed into the battlefield and blocked the monster's attack route. "Get out of the way." Renly's voice sounded behind her, full of anxiety. Although the battle was short, she still understood the difficulty of this inhuman existence. Fast reaction speed, but wide-ranging attacks. If it was a normal human enemy, she could basically solve it in one round, but this monster that looked like a human seemed to have no weaknesses. Or rather, its weaknesses were unknown. In this situation, it was particularly unwise to continue to fight with brute force, so Renly had already thought about escaping. However, she didn't know whether it was due to the aging of her body or the poison on the monster's claws. At this time, she only felt dizzy, her heart was pounding, and even her evasive movements were affected. In the end, she had to face the enemy in a mess. However, although she looked embarrassed and fell to the ground at this time, in fact, as a faceless man who was proficient in mysticism, she still had ways to try to get rid of the monster's counterattack. But now that Renly ran in front of her, she had no way to use it. Maybe the long years have made her accustomed to facing danger alone. Maybe the corrosion of time has made her forget how she was rescued. Maybe the severe dizziness made her a little hazy. Anyway, at this time, she subconsciously regarded the person in front of her as a child with little strength. So when she found that the child successfully stopped the hideous monster and even took the initiative to negotiate, she couldn't help but look dazed, and then her face was trance, as if she remembered something, but then she didn't want to think about anything, because she only felt that the surrounding environment was becoming more and more erratic, more and more hazy, and more. Renly in front didn't notice the abnormality of the person behind him at this time. At the moment, he was trying to appease the werewolf monster in front of him, looking at it, and even raised his hand to touch the monster's forehead. The distance was very close, and the appearance of the monster was very clear. The eyes were scarlet, full of violence, and the hideous fangs were stained with blood, and even entangled with a few strands of human black hair. The narrow mouth and head were similar to those of a normal wolf, but the body was like a human. Renly saw the existence of this monster for the first time, but in fact he was not unfamiliar with it. This familiarity was not just because of the memory of the previous life, but because of the mark on his wrist. In other words, he could feel that this monster was a product of chaos, just like his octopus. During the long experiment, he learned that, no matter how many creatures there were, they would not be hostile to him, so he was prepared to stop Renly from attacking at the beginning, so he stopped them between the two. This was actually a bit risky, because no one could be sure that this rule would work for all chaotic beings, but Renly was prepared for this, and even if he couldn't stop him, he could still dodge. The racial level upgrade not long ago strengthened his physical fitness again. After going through that period of weakness, Renly had already tested that his strength was no weaker than that of an average adult, and his agility was even more extraordinary because of his short and light body. This was the reason why he dared to intervene rashly. Unfortunately, or as expected, the monster in front of him did not attack again after being stopped by him, but hesitated in place, sniffing with his nose, and the scarlet in his eyes gradually faded. Renly could feel that it seemed to be in pain, so he raised his hand and sent comforting emotions to it, which made the monster calmer. It was originally ready to bypass him and continue to attack, but it became much more honest. It even sat on the ground with its lower body folded up like a dog and whimpered at Renly's touch. Unfortunately, this honesty did not last long. It was not because Renly made a mistake, but because a loud sound of horse hooves suddenly appeared on the road ahead. This sound made the monster a little restless, but it seemed reluctant to be touched by the boy, so it did not respond directly. However, when an arrow suddenly flew from behind, it howled with anger in its back, and then rushed to the depths of the bushes next to it without hesitation. It moved quickly, like a white ghost, and disappeared into the woods behind the bushes after a few breaths. It was very skilled in running away. This thought flashed through his mind, and Renly stared at the group of knights who appeared in his sight in front. Under the dim moonlight, a silver-grey flag fluttered slightly in the night wind. More than 20 knights under the flag were fully armed, and trotting towards here. They were obviously not Ironmen, and although the drooping flag was not clear, a close look revealed a twin tower symbol. It's the Free family from the Riverlands, Renly said with a sigh of relief, and turned his head to look at Rhaenyra's behind him. They may be chasing the monster. Let's just pretend they are father and son. He didn't finish his words, because Renly suddenly found that Rhaenyra's behind him had fainted at some point. This made him a little dumbfounded, and then he saw the wound on her arm that was scratched by the monster before, and his face changed. Wouldn't that claw be poisonous? This guess made Renly squat down to check the wound, and found that the surface seemed to be faintly black, and his heart quickly sank to the bottom. At the same time, the group of free knights had arrived nearby. The first one rode closer, looked down and asked, "Boy, was she scratched?" Renly turned his head to look at the knight in full plate armor, but before he could respond, the other party had already seen the scars on Rhaenyra's arm clearly in the moonlight, so without seeing him say anything else, he just turned over and dismounted, stepped forward and drew the long sword at his waist. "What are you going to do?" Renly frowned and asked. "Kill him. There are only 2 chapters today. My face is swollen after the tooth extraction, and my head hurts too. I'm not in a good condition. I will try to make up for it tomorrow. In addition, I owe 18 chapters now. The monthly votes increased sharply yesterday, and I owe 2 more chapters." Chapter 184 Merry. The creaking sound of the metal gate rubbing against the rock wall was very harsh. In a daze, Merry Free, who was sitting against the outer wall of the animal house, opened his eyes and looked around. He found that a team of fully armed plate-armored knights were riding back from outside the castle. Black Walder? The headache caused by the hangover made Merry's mind a little sluggish, but he still recognized the short and sturdy figure sitting on the black warhorse at a glance. Didn't he go to hunt down that monster? How come he came back so soon? Did he kill it successfully? This thought made Merry excited, and his somewhat scattered eyes quickly gathered. He began to scan the entire team, searching for a white figure. That monster was really too terrifying. Not only could it not be killed, no matter how hard you tried, but it also held a grudge. The entire Free family was troubled by it. Now if it was really killed, it would naturally be a great joy. At least, many people would not have to be so cautious when going out. For Merry, this was something to celebrate, because he was the one who brought the monster back. Or rather, the monster was originally a pet dog raised by his wife, but after attending King Robert's wedding, the pet dog became more and more bizarre. Later, something happened, and he, the original owner, was often blamed by his family members. Thinking about all this in a trance, Merry soon showed a disappointed look, because he did not see the body of the monster among the group of more than 20 knights. This proved that these people returned empty-handed again. This was normal. They had organized hunting many times, but no one had ever succeeded. The leading knight named Black Walder in the site was notorious, but he was not a smart person. But, who was that child? Merry discovered something special. Because the monster's claws and teeth had special toxins, the candidates for hunting monsters could only be fully armed knights, otherwise a slight scratch could cause big problems. However, it seemed that there was a child in this knight team, a pretty little boy. Looking at the short figure on the horseback of a certain knight, Merry was thoughtful. Whose illegitimate child in the family is this? Black Walder's? It's not quite like that. Although Black Walder is short, fat, and strong, he doesn't look very good. Who else could it be besides him? Thinking of this, Merry yawned and felt a little bored. It didn't matter to him which illegitimate child it was. In the twins, as long as it wasn't the illegitimate child of his Marquis father, it wouldn't be a big news. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at the leading knight who got off the horse and was taking off his armor with the help of his servants. His old Marquis father was almost 80 years old, but his 7th wife still gave birth to a healthy baby girl this year. This made many people wonder whether the beautiful wife of the Marquis, who was several decades younger than her husband, had an affair with someone in the castle. Some of the curious people in the family generally believed that this person might be the great-grandson of the Marquis Free in front of them, the cruel guy called Black Walder. Because Blackwater had always had a bad reputation, Merry was also suspicious of this. He even thought about going to his father to tell him about it when he was drunk. Maybe he could get some money for wine. However, thinking about Blackwater's bad reputation in the twins, he was a little scared. In the end, this idea never turned into action. Thinking of this, he felt a splitting pain in his head again, which made him grimace for a while. Then he climbed up from the outer wall of the beast house with difficulty and staggered towards the well. Back then, Merry Free was the strongest and most promising person in the Free family. How could he be afraid of such a young junior? It was just that he was really unlucky. That hateful Royal Forest Brotherhood. Thinking back to the Royal Forest Bandit suppression operation he participated in during the reign of the Mad King a few years ago, Merry felt that his head hurt even more, and even his butt began to ache. Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Dawn, led the army to successfully wipe out the notorious Kingswood Brotherhood, contributing a new asset to his already glorious life. His former squire, Jaime Lannister, was also knighted by the Sword of the Dawn after the battle, and was in the limelight for a while. As for himself, the most promising man in the Free family had contracted the rash before the battle began. The damn prostitute. Just thinking about it made Merry angry. What made him even more angry was a woman named Wingda the Whiteheart in the Kingswood Brotherhood, the evil woman who captured him in the war and branded a deer head on his butt. How could such a perverted woman exist in the world? Whenever Merry thought of this, he was afraid and hated it. Although he heard that Wingda the Whiteheart was dead afterwards, he paid special attention to it and found that no one had seen the body of the female bandit. So Merry thought that the woman must have run away. This speculation made Merry always want to go out to get information and then find someone to take revenge in the past few years. But the severe pain, as if his skull was cracked, came again and again, making him sigh dejectedly. After being captured by the female bandit, he was redeemed, but in the subsequent battle, he was unfortunately smashed in the head by a mace, and his knight career came to an end. Not only could he not continue to fight, but he also always felt headaches on weekdays, which seriously affected his life. There was no other way, except drinking to relieve the pain. What else can I do? Have a few children and raise them well. When squatting down to wash his face at the edge of the well, Merry thought about this dejectedly, feeling that there was really no hope in life. It would be better to dive into the well, to get rid of it. But this idea did not continue, because he suddenly heard a melodious bell from the top of a tower deep in the castle, which made him startled and recognized that it was a signal from his father, the Marquis, to summon family members in the castle. What important things could happen at this time? He was secretly surprised. Has the war in the western Heijiang city changed? Or did his old father, who was almost toothless and had a stroke, finally die? The thought in his mind did not stop him from getting up and rushing over. In fact, because he had washed his face, Merry's movements were much more agile than before, so he entered the Hall of the Twins in a short while. There were many descendants of the Free family in this generation. The hall in the castle was crowded with people, and it was as noisy as entering a trading market. Merry did not like to come here, because he felt that the hall was really gloomy, lacked light, and always had a rotten smell. However, his father had a high prestige in the family. He, the ninth son of the Free family who originally had a promising future, but now lived a life of idleness and waiting for death, really caught the attention of that person, who would always bring him up and ridicule him. So Merry did not dare not come, lest his father could not find him and get angry. But what happened again? He saw his bald father sitting on the black oak chair at the head of the hall. Although he had loose eye bags and was missing front teeth, he still looked energetic, so a guess in Merry's heart was quietly broken. Then he suddenly saw that there seemed to be an outsider in the hall, the boy who had returned with the knights before. Merry recognized the boy at a glance. After all, he was really eye-catching. And this discovery also made him more certain that the boy must be a illegitimate child of someone in the family, and now he was brought back to recognize his relatives. His father, the Marquis, had many children, and his children's children were countless. Sometimes he might not remember who was who, but he attached great importance to his own children. When he was in the mood, he would take care of them, even if they were illegitimate children. He couldn't help but make some sarcastic remarks, but generally speaking, the boys who were ridiculed by their fathers would get some benefits. Moreover, the Frees generally don't look that good. If someone has a beautiful illegitimate child, it would be hard not to attract the attention of his father, the Marquis. Merry, standing among the Frees in the hall, thought he had guessed the truth, but the steward's report later wiped out his guess. The inexplicable emotions in his heart were also swept away, and he turned into surprise. What did he hear? King Robert's younger brother? Lord Renly of Dragonstone? The boy in front of him? The new King Robert does have a younger brother who is much younger than him. As a noble, Merry naturally knows this. Unfortunately, although he participated in the wedding in King's Landing, his status was not high, and he was not able to sneak into the core wedding banquet, so he never saw the real person. However, he heard that the boy named Renly was given Dragonstone because King Robert was dissatisfied with the current heir Stannis and was ready to ignore the inheritance law and make his younger brother the next generation heir to the kingdom. After the wedding of the new king, this matter was discussed by the Frees in the castle. Merry himself also made many guesses about it, mostly some casual conversations with drinking buddies. But, I heard that Renly was sent to Highgarden as an adopted son, so why did he run to the twins now? The distance is a bit far. It is understandable that his old father received a visiting royal member so grandly, but this question puzzled Merry. The distance between the twins and Highgarden is almost half of Westeros, so he began to ask quietly, but unfortunately no one around him knew the truth, but someone knew how Lord Renly was brought back. I heard that Blackwater encountered it when he was tracking the monster. A Free beside him whispered, he also brought back a person who was scratched by the monster. Scratched? This made Merry stun for a moment, and he didn't care about gossip anymore. He shivered involuntarily and asked hurriedly, where is that person? He was placed in the Riverside Tower. The other party answered, and then whispered, we must avoid that place when we go out later. Merry nodded hurriedly. It's no big deal to be scratched by ordinary wild beasts, but it's different to be scratched by his wife's former pet dog. A boy who takes care of the animal shed in the twins was scratched not long ago. As a result, he went crazy the next day and bit everyone he saw in the castle. He had no reason at all. It would be fine if it was just like this, but the key point is that the person who was bitten will also go crazy. Thank you for the 500 reward from the book friend Booing, and thank you for the 100 reward from the book friend Zyanatang 246. Chapter 185 Abnormal Poison. The toxin on the monster's claws is very strong, and no antidote has been found yet. But according to our experience, the toxin usually takes effect the next night after the poisoning, when the moon just rises. On a stone tower in the twins, an old maester wearing a grey woolen robe and a lot of metal necklaces around his neck, said to the boy beside him, after being poisoned, he will lose his mind and attack others, and will also infect others with the poison in the process. So we can take measures to treat him, but no later than before the sun sets today. What about after he loses his mind? The boy asked. Will he always be a lunatic? No, he will die. The old maester who served the twins sighed and said, after the sun rises the next day, these poisoned people will suddenly die. I tried to save one of them, but it didn't work at all. Are there no exceptions? No exceptions. Renly was silent after hearing this. At this time, he was in a castle called the Twins in the Riverlands, and this castle was the birthplace of the monster. The Free family, who controlled the castle, had been harassed by the monster, so they would send knights to hunt it down. The old scholar in front of him also had relevant experience. However, in fact, the monster was created by Renly. It was the pet dog that broke into the banquet at Robert's wedding, ate a chicken leg, and then went into heat. At the beginning, Renly learned that the pet dog was a pet brought by someone from the Free family, and was later taken back. He didn't care much about it at first, but he didn't expect that the little guy in his memory would become a werewolf-like freak at this time. Looking at the tall and thin Ryan who was unconscious on the bed in the room, Renly felt quite depressed. How long have they met, and this person is suddenly in danger of life? Is she unlucky, or is he too unlucky? Renly felt very depressed. Last night, the Free Knights who rushed over were tough, and insisted on chopping off the head of the poisoned Rhaenys. Renly naturally couldn't let them succeed. At the same time, because Rhaenys was suddenly poisoned, he had to find a way to treat her in time. So he chose to expose his identity. Renly had not originally intended to do so, because it would bring some unnecessary trouble and suspicion. He had also thought about disguising himself as another noble. However, although the Free family and the Riverlands had not been established for a long time, they were not bumpkins that could be fooled at will. The process was not smooth, but the result was not unexpected. He was solemnly taken back here, to a special bridgehead castle located at the crossing of the Green Fork River in the Riverlands. Renly had memories of the twins and the Free family in his previous life, and that was obviously not a good impression. However, at this moment, he could not care about those things. The most important thing at the moment was to consider how to save Rhaenys. I have tried all kinds of ointments, and also tried a series of treatments such as bloodletting, bowel cleansing, leech therapy, and even tried to suppress the toxin with toxins, but all of these were ineffective. The onset of this poison was not like what ordinary people should be exposed to. Instead, it was like the old Maester in the room was still nagging, explaining, and paving the way for the young Duke, so that he would not blame himself if he could not save the person. It's like magic. Well, although the doctors of Old Town have dismissed magic as nonsense, I still believe in it very much. I heard that a kind of blood magic is popular in the eastern continent of Essos, which may be effective for this kind of poison. Unfortunately, although I believe in it, I'm not familiar with it. Magic? Renly narrowed his eyes while listening to the other party silently, and then suddenly asked, "Can you wake her up temporarily?" Wake her up? The Maester shook his head when he heard it. There is no way to wake her up. I have used various means to stimulate the poisoned, but they don't wake up, not even the slightest reaction. Of course, if you want me to heal your friend, then I can still try. Renly heard helplessly. He risked his identity by coming here, but he didn't get any useful feedback. The old Maester in front of him could only say how terrible the poison was, and how serious the consequences were. He had no idea about how to detoxify it, and was obviously not willing to help. The Free family of the twins is one of the most powerful in the Riverlands. As a Maester serving here, the man in front of him already represents the world's high-end medical talents, and he also has relevant experience. However, this man can't do it. Who can he find to solve the problem? He still has to find a way to wake her up, and then try magical means. After a moment of thinking, Renly made up his mind, so he turned to the old man and said, "Can I stay alone with him, Maester Demon?" "Of course, my Lord Duke." The old Maester replied, "But you'd better pay attention to the time and leave here before night. Of course, there will be guards outside the door. If there is any accident, just call out." Renly nodded, and the man turned and left. Seeing the old figure in grey clothes push open the door and disappear from sight, Renly sighed, then pulled up an oak chair in the stone house and came to the bedside. After glancing at the skinny bamboo pole in coma, he began to act. Renly's initial plan was to integrate the ancient road seed into Rhaenys' body, to try to save her. After all, this thing had a successful precedent, and although it might affect Rhaenys' thinking to a certain extent, it was better than death. However, Renly had no choice but to give up soon. For some reason, the seed could not be integrated into Rhaenys' body. Just like when it encountered dead objects in the past, the fire would only stick to the surface. Then he began to try to use the spiritual language to awaken the other party's consciousness, but the effect was also not good. It was like facing a pool of stagnant water. Renly, sitting on the chair, thought about it, and dug out the blue naga fire on his wrist. This thing was obviously a treasure, but Renly did not find any effect of this treasure on himself during the research during this period. There is no way to integrate it into the body, nor can it gain any power from it. If it is just kept in the wrist, even if it is very high end, it is still a waste, and a waste that may cause trouble. So Renly did not feel reluctant to try to let Rhaenys absorb it. Unfortunately, although the blue flame burned vigorously, the result was also not very good. This thing seemed to be very picky. Facing the second attempt, it still showed no signs of integrating into the target body. Renly was quite annoyed for a while. This doesn't work, and that doesn't work. Can I just watch this person die? After thinking hard for a long time, he suddenly thought of an ability that he had forgotten for a long time. Maybe this can have some effect. He was a little hesitant about this, but considering that he had no other way to use it at the moment, he decided to give it a try. There will be a third update today, but it will not be updated until the afternoon. The specific time is uncertain. It should be about the same when you come back at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 186 The Fallen Dragon. The stone wall behind him gave off a chill that made him shiver. However, his Lord Marquis had told him to keep this position so that he could listen to the noises in the room behind him more easily. It wasn't because he was listening to any secrets. The person in the room was very important. At least, he must not be allowed to encounter any danger in the twins. So they had to pay close attention to everything in the room so that they could go in and rescue at any time if there was an accident. The companions on the other side of the door kept the same position as Rhodes, but compared to the strong Rhodes, the thin companions were obviously not in good health. After a while, they couldn't help but distance themselves and raised their hands to rub him, their expressions filled with pain. Please help me keep an eye on it, Rod. My waist really can't stand the cold. God, why did Lord Free make this door so thick? We can only eavesdrop. This place is only for distinguished guests, so of course it should be built firmly. Rod answered in a low voice and listened attentively to everything in the house. In fact, the best choice in this situation is to stick to the door, not next to it, but Lord Free, the manager, said that the distinguished guests must not find any signs of us eavesdropping, so they can only stay on both sides. God knows why the group of Lord Free didn't ask the distinguished guest to come out, since there was danger inside, and insisted on staying inside. But there was no way. With a few casual instructions from above, they, as private soldiers, could only complete this task with all their heart and soul. If there was any mistake, it would be terrible. Lord Free said that, if the distinguished guests inside were in trouble, the two of them would be killed. Rhodes had no objection to this, or rather, as his ancestors had been private soldiers of the Free family for several generations, he had long been accustomed to all reasonable or unreasonable requests from the masters, but he thought this task was still a bit difficult. Nothing else. The voice inside was vague, it was really hard to hear clearly, and it was really hard to tell whether the sound was good or bad. Warrior, health? What is he talking about? The companions also couldn't hear what was going on inside, but they knew that the guest was the only one who could speak in the room at this time, so there was no need to guess the source of the voice. Maybe he was praying for the poisoned guy. Rhodes replied after hearing this. I heard that the poisoned guy was the guest's savior. This rumor was of course true. Although the guest had only arrived in the twins this morning, the relevant rumors had already spread throughout the Free family. For example, the identity of the guest, why he appeared here, and the specific situation of the poisoned person. Lord Walder Free announced the identity of the distinguished guest in front of all the Free family members and expressed a warm welcome, so everyone knew that the young boy was the youngest brother of His Majesty the King. As for why His Majesty's brother appeared near the twins, the news spread inside and outside the castle through the mouth of a knight who was hunting monsters. It is said that the Duke of Dragonstone was originally staying in a place called Shield Island in the River Reach, but was kidnapped along the seashore to the Riverlands. The kidnappers originally intended to go to Seafront City not far from the twins and hand him over to the Ironborn, who were attacking the city there, but in the end the young Duke was rescued. The one who saved him was the poisoned comatose person. That's why the young Duke paid so much attention to the comatose guy. After arriving at the twins, except for talking with the old Marquis for a while at the beginning, he stayed in the house to take care of him all the time. Now it sounds like he is even praying for him constantly. He is so grateful. He is really a very rare good man. Guard Rhodes sighed silently, but his companions on the opposite side were quite puzzled. But don't warriors pray for victory? For health, we should pray to the Virgin Mary, right? The Virgin Mary blesses women with smooth childbirth. Knowing that his companions believed in the old gods of the north, Rhodes was not surprised to hear this, but explained. The warriors made the 44 sons of King Hugo of the Hill strong and healthy. That's what the story says, so of course we have to pray to her for health. Smooth childbirth. His companions were puzzled. Then why does my cousin always pray to the Virgin Mary to bless her son? Of course, it also includes raising adults, children growing up, and having many children. praying for maternal love and mercy. Rod answered patiently, "Anyway, it's right to pray to the Virgin Mary for the birth of children." The two guards over there were muttering about the division of duties of the gods outside the door, and Renly was praying here as they expected. But his prayers were only one or two sentences back and forth, either hoping for health, or hoping to be given courage, successfully defeat the poison, and so on, and the objects of his prayers were limited to warriors. It was a bit monotonous, but it kept repeating. He sat there muttering, staring at the unconscious person on the bed, but his expression was slightly happy. The warrior's sun tree was the only ability that Renly could count on at present. This ability allowed him to get a response when he prayed to a warrior of one of the 7 gods. However, this response seemed unreliable in the past. Not only did it not work on him, but Renly also did not find any obvious effect after several experiments on others. It was silent, and he could not be sure whether it was really useful. So later Renly didn't want to think about this thing anymore. Until now, he didn't actually have any hope, but he would always feel very unwilling if he didn't try it. However, he didn't know whether it was really a blind cat that met a dead mouse, or there was some unpredictable network of relationships between those so-called gods. In short, when he started to chant, the unconscious Rhaenys actually responded. Or it was not her who responded, but the human skin mask on her face that responded. It was not very obvious after the first prayer, but after the second and third prayers, Renly could clearly see that the originally calm Ryan suddenly showed a trace of pain. Because of the psychic language feature, Renly could detect that this pain was not from Rhaenys herself, but a trace of feedback that suddenly emerged from the mask. This situation was really beyond his expectations, but then Renly remembered that it seemed that Rhaenys had told him that there was something like the remaining will of the dead in the mask, and that the mask was made with the power of the thousand-faced god. How could this help Rhaenys' current situation? Renly didn't know, or he wasn't sure, whether this situation was good or bad, but having feedback was better than sitting here and waiting for the other party to die, so he continued to nag without stopping. As if it was a tight spell, the more he nags, the more painful the expression of lion on the bed becomes, and finally it is full of ferocity, and the tightly closed eyes suddenly open, and the brown eyes are filled with a fierce stare at the ceiling above the head, which really scares Renly. Then he nags faster. As a result, lion gradually turns yellow, then darkens, and finally even turns black and cracks, as if it was burned by fire, which makes Renly a little worried that this will disfigure the real Rhaenys for the second time. But then he no longer has such concerns, because just after the mask cracks, he suddenly feels a wave of emotions that he didn't have before. Weak, but real. Can this mask also block my telepathy? Renly was very surprised by this, because it was obviously not the case when he touched it before, but he didn't have time to think about it now. Seeing the gap in the mask, he hurriedly reached out to pinch it and pulled it off to throw it aside, but then, his movements unconsciously paused, because he found that the woman under the mask had opened her eyes at some point. The purple eyes now looked dull and dark, as if covered with a layer of grey. After removing the mask, the grey did not disappear at all. Under the sunlight outside the narrow window, it looked like a pool of dead water without any vitality, motionless, dazed, dull, and lifeless. I dreamed that my dragon was shot dead in dawn. The weak and hoarse voice wiped out the joy that Renly had just had. Feeling the dead air in the other's mind, he felt something was wrong. I dreamed that it was very scared, very terrified, and very helpless. Dreams are just dreams. Wake up and think of a way, Renly urged in a low voice, but the other party did not seem to hear what he said, or did not listen, but muttered to himself. Later I dreamed that it was not dead, but its wings were shot through, and it could no longer fly. Renly frowned upon hearing this, and found that he could not rely on this confused guy, so he looked at his left wrist, and decided to test the things inside again. Maybe the mask also blocked these things? It can't fly. It is trapped in the castle, surrounded by obstacles. It is not the same as when it was in the sky. Muttering, the woman on the bed slightly tilted her head to look at Renly. Her lifeless eyes vaguely reflected his shadow, which made Renly pause in the action of pinching out a wisp of fire. Those are things that a dragon should not have to face, so it wants to get rid of all of this. It wants to break free of all of this. but it has long lost its wings. It can't get rid of these things at all, and it keeps struggling, but it is always doing useless work. Renly frowned and placed a wisp of blue flame on the other's forehead, but there was no sign of fusion, so he took it back and replaced it with a grey one. Then it got tired, and it thought it should rest. Death might really be a relief for it, and it should embrace death. It should succumb to its fate. It shouldn't struggle. It should die in dawn, in that castle, instead of surviving as a dragon without wings. Is a dragon still a dragon without wings? The voice became weaker and weaker towards the end, and the hazy eyes gradually closed. At this time, Renly found that his grey fire still could not be integrated, and the other party's mental death was getting worse, which made him feel depressed, and even quite angry. But the last sentence left by the other party made him tremble all over, and all his emotions turned into silence. I hate you, Renly, including the monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. He now owes 21 chapters. Chapter 187 Methods and Conspiracies. After the faint murmur of mosquitoes and flies, the stone room and the tower fell into silence. Looking at the silent woman with closed eyes on the bed, Renly seemed to be in a daze, as if he had not yet reacted, hoping that she might have fainted again or fallen asleep. But the feedback from the psychic language made his heart sink to the bottom. No feedback. He raised his hand carefully to test her nose, but he also didn't feel any breathing, which made him inexplicably feel absurd. Did she die just like that? Thinking back to the last words left by this person, he was even a little confused at this time. How could she die so easily? Didn't the maester say that he would die after he finished his madness at night? He should still have time. But he died just with a minor scratch. Obviously Renly couldn't understand all this. He also didn't know that this seemingly normal woman was actually very old and her body functions were extremely weak. It was already very difficult to track her whereabouts all over the world, not to mention the erosion of some special toxins. But Renly didn't want to accept this result at all. After staring blankly for a while, he gritted his teeth and suddenly wrapped the woman on the bed tightly with the blanket under her body, then carried her and turned around to run outside. Renly's body was very light, not the kind of lightness, but the kind of loose bones and muscles like an old man. And Renly's strength was not weaker than that of an ordinary adult, so he ran very fast. It was just a child who was less than 7 years old holding an adult. This situation looked very discordant, so much so that the two guards outside the door were even a little scared when they saw it, so they hurriedly followed and helped. They did not notice that the person wrapped in the quilt had quietly changed his face, nor did they notice that the person had stopped breathing, because Renly kept urging them to hurry up and take him to the cathedral in the castle. Why go to the cathedral? The two guards were puzzled, but no one would give them an explanation. They hurried along the way, and many people were quite surprised by this, but they also avoided in panic because of the poisoned person. The butler who met him halfway did not hide, but respectfully stated that Lord Free invited him to participate in the welcome banquet in the evening. Renly responded that he would talk about it when he came out. Then he entered the cathedral. What are you going to the cathedral for? The butler was quite surprised by this, thinking that he hoped that the monk's prayers could save the life of the poisoned person. But then he heard a conversation coming from the sanctuary. Not long after, the thin monk from the twins reluctantly followed the two guards and pushed the door out. Facing the steward's puzzled look, he shook his sleeves and said in a complicated tone, "The little duke wants to stay alone in there to pray. I think it will be dangerous, but he insists on doing so. I hope the gods will bless him." The steward was a little speechless about this, and then turned around and ran towards the hall without thinking, ready to report the matter. Renly in the sanctuary didn't care about the outside world's reaction at this time. After driving out the monk and the two guards who escorted him, he directly locked the door of the sanctuary and came to the bottom of one of the 7 statues deep in the sanctuary. The gods of the 7 gods church have 7 faces in one, and one god has 7 images, so there are 7 stone statues standing deep in the dimly lit stone building. Each statue is built majestically and sacredly, and there are more or less candles on the altar in front of them. These are the candles that the Free family members and their servants brought when they came to pray in the castle. There are the most candles in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary, which means that the most people have prayed to the Virgin Mary recently. There is no candle under the statue of the stranger in the corner. At this time, there are more than 10 candles under the statue of a warrior in full armor that Renly is facing. In the quiet environment, some of these candles are burning in a trance, while others have long been extinguished. The dim light shines on Renly under the altar and Rhaenys, who is lying quietly in front of Renly, which seems a bit gloomy. However, Renly did not pay attention to the environment here. He looked down at the motionless woman in front of him, and pursed his lips. He could not solve death, but he remembered correctly that there is such a thing as resurrection in this world. In his previous life memory, one of the protagonists of this world was resurrected by a red-robed woman. Renly knows a red-robed woman, or knows some general information about the red-robed clergy. That is the exclusive clothing of priests of a sect that believes in the Lord of Light outside of Westeros. The belief in the Lord of Light is not popular in Westeros. Even in the nearly 7 years of living here, he only saw a drunkard-like red-robed monk at his brother's wedding. That person was a clergyman who came to Westeros to preach. As a result, he became good friends with Robert, because he could drink and fight. There was only one person in the huge King's Landing. It was naturally impossible for the Lord of Light to be worshipped in the Twins. But the foreign Lord of Light could resurrect the dead, so could the local 7 gods not. Renly was not sure about this. Unlike the Lord of Light, the 7 gods had never shown miracles, but he did not think that the 7 gods were false gods, because the characteristics of the sons of warriors on their bodies had proved that the 7 gods also existed and had power. Since they existed, could they be communicated with? Could they resurrect people? Renly was not sure, but when he encountered an unexpected change, he decided to give it a try. For ordinary people, there would probably be no effective way to deal with this, but he was different. He would not ignore the fact that there was another god in his wrist at this time. Although it was a bit useless, it was also a god. What happens when a god breaks into the realm of another god? With this thought in mind, Renly came here. After taking a deep breath, he started to act directly. It seemed that he took it for granted, because when he dug out the blue flame on his wrist, the surrounding environment did not change at all. It was still quiet and dim, and there was nothing unusual. He frowned at this, but did not give up. Instead, he stood in front of Rhaenys' body, under the statue of a warrior of one of the 7 gods, with his fingers erect, his eyes fixed on the blue candle light burning on his fingertips, and he muttered a simple, but not simple sentence to it. "May the warrior bless you." As soon as the voice fell, the blue candle on the fingertips shook for a moment, but nothing else happened. Seeing this, Renly was silent for a moment, and then he recited the second sentence. "May the warrior bless you." The candlelight was still shaking, and there was no special phenomenon. But as the prayer continued, its shaking became more and more obvious, as if invisible waves were spreading. At the same time, the stone cheeks covered by the helmet above the warrior statue that Renly was paying attention to seemed to begin to glow. He was encouraged by this, so he stood there and kept chanting. Going to the sept to pray. In the den hall on the other side, the bald old man sitting on the black oak high back chair smacked his lips after hearing the butler's report. He is pious, but he is a fool. I originally thought about whether I could marry a daughter to that boy, but now it seems that I'd better forget it. Should we send soldiers to keep an eye on it? The fat butler asked. Is there any need to say that? The bald old man glanced at him after hearing this. That is a good treasure made of gems. If we break it, our good king will make trouble. Then he waved his hand, indicating that the matter was just like that. Seeing this, the butler began to report the second thing. Patrick Mullister, the heir to Seaward, has come to us for help. He claims that the Ironborn's attack is too crazy and Seaward is about to fall. Patrick? The old man sitting on the chair smacked his lips again when he heard this. That boy is good, but I heard that he has no engagement yet? The old man asked in return, but did not wait for an answer and continued. Tell him that he can pick any daughter of our free family. As for the support, we will talk about it after we have chosen one. That's right, we will talk about it after we have chosen one. The fat butler was the confidant of the old Lord Free. He understood what he said, and then whispered, in this way, he may wait for King Robert's support, or wait for the Tullers from Riverrun to arrive. Wait for support. Lord Free smiled and said, at that time, his mother was slept with by the Ironborn for many days. No, he knows what's going on. The butler nodded and then asked in a smaller voice, "What about the Ironborn? At least we have to let them hold on until the boy agrees to our request. Now, give the information and the money." The old Marquis said without any change in expression, "Be careful, don't get caught. Euron Greyjoy is not easy to deal with, and he may take money, but not do anything. I heard that the Iron Islands have urged him to go back. He is ambitious, and ambition makes him easy to deal with." The old Marquis said, "Hey, it has been delayed for so long. Do you really think he can still return to the Iron Islands? Will he go back and wait to be beheaded?" As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand to change the subject without waiting for the butler to continue speaking. "Have you asked the Maester to write a letter about Renly? A raven has been sent to contact the king." The butler smiled when he heard this. "This is a good opportunity. We were not very popular with the king to begin with, and now we can at least get some credit." "Not popular?" The old Marquis sneered when he heard this. "When have we, the Frees, ever been popular? Those lords and masters boast that their family history is thousands of years, and they are very noble, but what is the result? We have suppressed them for 600 years, and made them breathless. Who wouldn't be jealous?" Although he said so, the expression on the old man's face was full of indignation, and he was also nagging. "Late free. Remember, as long as we are strong." Even if he didn't finish his words when he suddenly heard a panicked shout from outside, which made the old man look unhappy. "These little bastards." Again he didn't finish his words either. A young man dressed as a servant ran into the hall like a piss and shit and shouted, "Oh no, grandfather, the Green Fork River is flooded. Why are you panicking? Is it uncommon for this river to flood?" The old man scolded after hearing this. "No, this time it's too." The young servant looked terrified. "This time it's too big, too big. Thank you for the 500 reward from my friend Wujet, and thank you for the 100 reward from my friend Xianatang 246 and my friend Imyunion." Chapter 188 Qualitative Change. The Twins is the home of the Free family in the Riverlands, but it is not limited to one castle, but two castles guarding the two ends of a wide stone bridge. The people of the Free family live in these two castles on a daily basis, and the old Marquis Walder Free, as the head of the family, occasionally runs here and there. Although many great nobles may control more than one castle, the two castles, so close, are basically the only ones in Westeros. The reason for such construction is mainly to facilitate the Free family, to collect bridge tolls and to be more conducive to defense. Compared with the general history of more than 1,000 years of the Lord family in Westeros, the Free family is very young, only 600 years old, and even the history of their vassals is longer than this. But although they are young, the power and strength of the Free family far exceeds that of ordinary nobles in the Riverlands, and they are even among the top nobles in the Riverlands. There are many reasons, but the fundamental reason is the bridge under the castle and the bridge toll. The Twins are located on a huge river called the Green Fork, which vertically separates a large area of road from the north to the Riverlands. To get from the north to the west Riverlands, the Twins are the only crossing point within hundreds of miles. Not to mention the importance of the geographical location during the war, the tolls alone have made the Free family rich. In other words, the bridge under the castle is the survival of the Free family and the foundation of their growth. However, today, on a relatively clear winter day, their foundation has suffered a dangerous collision. Under the sun, a huge wave suddenly emerged from the end of the site outside the castle and rushed towards the Twins at a high speed. The faint sound was like a waterfall hitting pebbles, and it was like the vast river water that had been blocked by the dam for a long time finally met the floodgates and rushed in all at once. Some soldiers who were patrolling on the castle walls first discovered this, followed by a group of people in the castle towers. Finally, the news spread rapidly, spreading to the inside and outside of the two castles. People did not believe it at first, because this situation was unimaginable. But after seeing it with their own eyes, they had to believe it. So panicked screams and anxious shouts spread throughout the two castles. People who cut vegetables, drink, have affairs with their great-grandmother, direct descendants, collateral descendants, children, grandchildren, servants, kitchen helpers, soldiers, stable boys. No matter what their identity or what they were doing, they were all affected by this sudden situation and fled out of the castle in a panic, not caring about anything else. Relying on the custom of collecting tolls in the Twins, the gates of the two castles were not closed at this time, so many people managed to escape, but not all. So when the huge waves at the end of the river hit, the group of people who did not escape could faintly feel the ground shaking under their feet, and then they were directly soaked by the large amount of cold water falling from the sky. "Are you alright?" The old Marquis, who was sitting on a chair and being carried out of the castle, was lucky. When the flood came, he happened to arrive at the doorway of the castle, so he avoided the fate of a drowned chicken. However, he saw his descendants following behind him in a miserable state, dripping with water, and with terrified looks on their faces. This made his original panic suddenly disappear, and turned into anger. With just such a small storm, you all can't sit still? If I really die, then the Free family run, they come again. The terrified screams interrupted his reprimand again. In an instant, many people who had been relieved became panicked again. Even the originally angry old Marquis no longer had the mind to educate his juniors at this moment. With an anxious face, he hurriedly signaled his sons to carry him out of this dangerous family castle as soon as possible. Under the sun, huge waves visible to the naked eye once again rushed towards the stone bridge in the two castles on the edge of the stone bridge, and the exits at both ends of the castle kept rushing out one after another in a state of embarrassment. Then they gathered on both sides of the bridge, staring at their originally very safe castle being hit by the river again and again, watching the waves constantly fanning like a giant slap, watching the fish swimming in the river hitting the castle walls, bridge decks and towers with the impact, and then falling to the ground and flopping. Looking at all this, every member of the Free family who escaped had a different reaction at this moment. The adults were full of fear and confusion. Some knelt down to pray, and some turned around on the spot. Some children cried loudly in the arms of their nannies, while others looked at everything in front of them with surprise. One boy even cheered, because a fish was thrown at his feet, but he was beaten to tears. What happened over there? A farmer who was picking wheat ears in the field in the distance was stunned when he saw what happened in the direction of the twins. Several people beside him were so scared that they knelt on the ground and shouted for the gods to bless them. Several dusty merchants on the dirt road outside the field also saw everything. Some were stunned, while others sat on horseback and watched everything with gloating. Did the gods in heaven finally open their eyes and decide to punish our Lord Free? No one responded. This situation was destined to become an unsolved mystery. There was a commotion outside, but no one paid attention to what was happening in the cathedral and the twins. The situation happened suddenly, and people only cared about escaping, but forgot about a certain distinguished guest. When they remembered, they no longer dared to enter the castle that was shaking faintly with the collision of the river. At this time, Renly was still chanting towards the blue flame on his finger, and every time he chanted, the flame on his hand would shake violently, and an invisible wave would spread suddenly. If someone saw all this, they would find that the frequency of the agitation of the river outside was closely related to the number of times the flame shook. However, at this time, not to mention that no one noticed, even the person involved did not take it to heart, or rather, as the invisible wave continued to spread, his whole body seemed to be hit continuously. His thoughts became a little dazed, and the things and emotions in his mind quietly evoked some long forgotten memories in his mind. Sir Renly, thank you for saving me. They say that your Dornish lords and even lords' wives openly keep mistresses and lovers. Most of them are homosexual. Is that true? Can you imagine the feeling of having the water slapping you in the face? Come on, we are going to start over. I won't get sick, but you may not. We are leaving here. Are you happy? When we get back to King's Landing, I can show you a hill named after me, where I plan to build a big garden. It stinks now, but it will get better. What? You don't believe it? Are you scared? Long time no see. I've gotten used to it over the years. You said your name was Renly in the Dornish desert. This name is rare. Don't worry, it's been more than 40 years, and we've let go of what we should have let go of long ago. I hate you, Renly. I hate you. There were all kinds of noisy sounds coming from the direction behind him. And finally there was even a sudden knock on the door, which made Renly's trance-like thoughts gather again, but after looking at the silent woman in front of him, he ignored it, losing the crispness and tenderness of a child. The voices of prayers have become hoarse and weak without knowing when, but gradually it seems to have become the only sound in this temple. As time passed, the face of the statue flickered, because of the prayers became brighter and brighter, until a certain moment came. The accumulated brightness seemed to poke through a layer of window paper, and the dim temple was instantly shrouded in a dazzling golden light. There is another chapter in the afternoon, but the time cannot be confirmed, so friends can come back at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening to read it. In addition, due to the special period these days, I can't post comments on this chapter. Chapter 189. What are the 7 gods? What are gods? This question once again came to Renly's mind as he walked in a golden mist-filled hall. When the prayer stopped, when the warrior statue changed, and when a brilliant golden light completely engulfed him, Renly found himself in another place. A misty hall with a hard dark golden surface. The ground under his feet was like stone, and it felt solid when he stepped on it. Looking around, a golden mist enveloped the 4 directions, and no other substances could be seen. It was as if this was a world made of mist. Where is this? Renly was confused. He originally hoped to use the drowned god's fire to stimulate the 7 gods, but he didn't expect that what he stimulated was all this at the moment. There was no one to communicate with. Who could he find to complete his goal? So after wandering around here for a while, Renly squatted down and looked at the surface. Everything around him seemed illusory, but the ground under his feet felt quite real. He had no other choice but to observe it. Then, he saw something different. Looking carefully at the surface through the hazy mist, Renly discovered that the surface was not pure color. There were lines of faces carved on it, men, women, old people, and children. Although the faces were simply carved, their charm could still be seen at a glance. What are these? He thought about this question, and raised his hand to touch one of the faces of a teenager. Then a series of hazy pictures emerged in his mind one after another. The shrill screams in the simple thatched house, the wailing after being born, and the repeated bedwetting in childhood. Before he was 5 years old, he had to go out and pick up wheat ears and run errands behind the adults. When he was 7 years old, the cold winter came. There was enough dry firewood, but there was a shortage of food. Both parents starved to death. Then he lived alone until he was 11 years old, but unfortunately he caught a cold. After waking up one day, he died on the straw bed in his own house under the care of a kind neighbor. In the north, the territory of the Manderly family, before the Conqueror's War, a farmer's son. The continuous images flashed at a very fast speed. Renly could not determine the specific details of the boy's life, but he had guessed his general identity, and vaguely understood what this face was. Soul? Or rather, the soul of the 7 gods? In that long and fast life picture, what Renly saw most often was the boy's prayer. When he was a child, he prayed with his parents. After his parents died, he prayed alone. Finally, at the last moment before his death, he was still praying to the Virgin Mary, hoping that he could be pitied by the gods and go to heaven. That's right, heaven. In the belief system of the 7 gods in Westeros, there are heaven and hell, or in other words, most of the gods in this world have similar existences. Renly didn't think much about this before, but since gods exist, if you believe in them, then what about heaven and hell? Most of those who believe in the 7 gods devoutly believe in the existence of heaven and hell. Thinking thoughtfully, he raised his hand and touched the other facial patterns on the ground. As he expected, after touching it, some memories of the dead would also emerge. Some died of old age, some were murdered, some died of plague, and some fell off a cliff. Different genders, different ages, different looks. The only thing in common is that they are all very pious. This is the heaven of the 7 gods, Renly thought. But what about the gods in heaven? There can't be no gods here, right? With this idea in mind, he stood up and continued to explore the 4 directions. However, after a long exploration, let alone gods, he didn't see even a little bit of extra changes. There was only fog on the ground, and the faces on the ground. Renly frowned. He arrived at this mysterious place in a miraculous way. Normally, he would have enough patience to explore all of this, but now he didn't have much curiosity. Where are the gods? Where are the gods? Where is the god with 7 faces? His eagerness suddenly gave him an idea, and then he was about to open his mouth to pray, but then he was shocked to find that he had no ability to speak. Or rather, he couldn't feel that he had a mouth at all. What is going on? The question just emerged in his mind, and then Renly suddenly found that he had lost his hands as well. Not only his hands, but also his legs, his chest, his stomach, and even everything about him. Where have I gone? This thought flashed through his mind, and then his narrow perspective suddenly underwent a wonderful change. His sight began to spread from the normal vision of his eyes to a 365-degree panoramic view of everything, from the original visibility of less than 50 meters to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands. The rapidly stretched perspective made him seem to be rising rapidly, while the earth below him was shrinking rapidly. The surrounding golden mist was still permeating and covering the 4 directions, but gradually, Renly could see what the place he was in looked like. It seemed to be a golden rhinoceros lying horizontally, or a rhinoceros-shaped land, with a huge main body, and twinkling golden stars around it. However, the shape became more and more familiar to Renly, and he suddenly remembered a map of Westeros he had seen in King's Landing. If you leave the north out, and turn the map sideways, Westeros looks like this. So what is this? A map of faith distribution? Or is the heaven of the 7 gods a reflection of Westeros? But where are the gods? He wondered. Where are the gods? The 7 gods? Not long after this question appeared, Renly's perspective changed again. He found himself suddenly in a dark and damp basement, where a girl in thin clothes and chains was praying silently. He came to a village, where the old man in the village was quietly listening to the monks preaching. He came to a magnificent church, where many blue-robed nuns were singing hymns. He came to the castle tower, where the woman in the tower was slowly stroking her bulging belly, and he came to. The endless changes were dazzling, but gradually, a kind of enlightenment came to Renly's heart. What is a god? In other words, what are the 7 gods among the gods? Father, mother, warrior, girl, blacksmith, old woman, stranger. Justice and judgment, maternal love and nurturing, strength and courage, innocence and purity, craftsmanship and labor, wisdom and future, death and unknown. What are the 7 gods? Compared with other gods with distinct images and functions, the 7 gods seem to represent the beautiful visions and expectations of mankind. So, the 7 gods are people. Or, the 7 gods are all those who believe in the 7 gods? This idea made Renly feel quite absurd as soon as it appeared, because he learned not long ago that faith is a collection of human will, so in a sense, gods are naturally people. However, before he could continue to think about it, his perspective began to change again, or in other words, he returned to the original human appearance when he just arrived. Everything that changed in an instant made him a little uncomfortable. Standing in the hall filled with golden mist, he stayed for more than 10 seconds before reacting, and then hurriedly looked down at his body. It looked exactly the same as normal, but Renly suddenly found that there were no marks on his left wrist. He was sure that he did not come here with his real body. Thoughts? The world of thoughts? Soul? Soul out of the body? A series of speculations emerged unconsciously, but Renly did not think about it at this time, because he suddenly thought of another question. If the 7 gods really refer to all those who believe in the 7 gods, if the 7 gods do not have a specific main thought, then who should he talk to about resurrection? The millions of people in Westeros? This is simply a fantasy. No, that's not right. If the 7 gods really do not have a main thought, then what is entertaining him now, or what is changing his perspective? This thought flashed through Renly's mind, and he suddenly felt the golden mist around him suddenly gather behind him. Turning around, he saw a person who was constantly condensing into shape with the golden mist. The soles of feet, legs, torso, hands, neck, head, facial features, hair. The mist seemed to have turned into cells, pieces of flesh and blood, and they gathered from bottom to top, gradually forming a complete human body. Finally, when the surrounding mist stopped turbulent, when the golden light on the man's body dissipated, and when his long black hair was washed by the thick fog, Renly was stunned on the spot. This person looked like himself, but she was completely different from him. She was a woman. Thank you MOM for the reward of 1000. Thank you 160,326,103,920,991 for the reward of 500, and thank you Satches for the reward of 100. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190 Agents and Cooperation. Beautiful ice blue eyes, fair and delicate face, a slight smile on the corner of the mouth. If the face of the person opposite was not softer, the clothes on his body were not a long golden robe with long sleeves, and his hair was much longer than his current short hair, Renly would have thought he was looking in the mirror. But thinking again of the cohesive look he had seen before, he suspected that this person did not look like this originally, but could change his appearance at will. Sure enough, the first sentence the other party said confirmed it directly for him. Male humans generally prefer to communicate with the opposite sex, rather than the same sex. At the same time, they always have a false confidence in their appearance. The beautiful voice of the girl, as graceful as pearls falling on a jade plate, can make people unconsciously relax their minds, and the meaning contained in the words also proves that the other party does not seem to be putting on any divine airs. You are? Renly asked hesitantly. Are you the 7 gods? As you can see, the 7 gods are all those who believe in the 7 gods. The other party replied softly, rather than saying that I'm the 7 gods, it is better to say that the 7 gods have condensed into a temporary spokesperson to talk to you. If the 7 gods are all people, why would he want to communicate with me? Although he was in a hurry at this time, Renly was still suspicious about this. Or, how could he think? Whatever people have, God will naturally have. The girl, who was less than 5 meters away from him, replied, people's thoughts and desires grow according to their own standpoints, and God's thoughts and desires are rooted in all believers, so he has the need to communicate with you. Renly seemed to understand this, but he didn't come here to get to the bottom of it and study what God is all about, so after hearing this, he nodded silently and changed the subject. So what does he want to communicate with me? Although the other party is not human, the negotiation naturally requires taking the initiative, so directly saying I want you to help me with something is the worst strategy, and it is likely to be a trap. Instead, it is better to understand the other party's purpose first. However, it is obvious that his judgment does not apply to the person in front of him, because after Renly finished speaking, the other party directly explained the current situation clearly. You hope that the gods can resurrect your friend, but he cannot truly resurrect her, because your friend does not really exist in this world. Does not really exist? Renly was stunned when he heard this, then frowned and said, how is that possible? Not real. Has it been air that has been talking to me these days? Her soul and body exist. The girl explained, but she does not exist, or rather, she does not exist in this world. But she has body temperature, needs to eat and drink water, and has her own goals in this world. Renly was even more confused. If this does not count as existence, then what does? Existence in appearance does not mean existence in the true sense. The girl said, you can think of her as a reflection in the water, a ray of light from the morning star in the sky. She has her thoughts, memories, soul, and body, and her behavior is no different from that of ordinary people. But she is not real, or rather, to the gods she does not really exist in this world. She is at the other end of time, but because of a rift in time, she was thrown into the present. So I say, she does not exist. I think, therefore I am. Renly wanted to refute this, but what he cared more about at this moment was the various meanings contained in this sentence. Non-existence, reflection, time rift. This sentence was very mysterious. Thinking of everything he had faced in the past, he had a vague understanding, but more doubts and puzzles emerged. But then he suddenly remembered that he had tried to use the seeds of the ancient road in the fire of the drowned god to save Rhaenys before, but it didn't work. Is it because of her non-existence? Everything he heard made Renly want to continue asking questions along this topic, but at this time, the other party's words instantly put his mind back on track. But not being able to resurrect does not mean that she cannot be saved. The gods cannot save people who do not exist in this world, but they can make her become a person in this world. What do you mean? Renly frowned. Firego and Talion, the seeking of Bravos, has a wife who believes in the 7 gods. The girl smiled and replied, and she has been praying devoutly to the gods to give her a child recently. Reincarnation? Renly frowned when he heard this. Putting aside the mysterious and inexplicable words about existence and non-existence from the other party's mouth, Renly is very familiar with reincarnation, and he also knows clearly about the seeking of Bravos. There are 9 free trade cities on another piece of land east of the Westeros continent. Bravos is one of the most powerful cities among the 9 free trade cities, and the seeking is a ruler of Bravos. If it is really arranged like this, Renly thinks there is nothing wrong with it. Although it is not a physical resurrection, it is not much different from physical resurrection, and the effect may be better. But at this time, he is somewhat doubtful whether everything the other party said before is true. It's just, do I have any other choice? What are the conditions? He asked. What are the conditions? The condition is that you have to become the agent of the gods in the world. The girl said, handle some matters related to believers for him, punishment, reward, judgment, blessing. At first, Renly didn't feel anything when he heard these, but gradually he found that something was wrong. What about the time? He asked. Until you die. Impossible. Renly frowned and replied, I can promise to do one or several things for him, and I can serve him for a year or several years, but if you want me to be his servant for my whole life, don't even think about it. Don't you want to save your friend? The girl asked curiously. Besides, the 7 gods are not an independent will, and you are not anyone's servant. I do, but it's not at the cost of sacrificing freedom. Renly said coldly, as for what the 7 gods are, it doesn't matter, because whether you serve one person or a group of people, the key is to serve. The other party didn't say anything after hearing this, but lowered his head and pondered. Renly didn't speak again when he saw this, and began to wait silently for the other party's response. What he said was not some kind of bargaining, but what he really thought. The agent of the gods? This title sounds high and noble, but he had awakened a god with his own hands before, so he didn't think there was any honor in this so-called agent. The service projects mentioned by the other party did not sound like bad things, and should even be good things. Renly himself did not reject this, but it was impossible for him to spend his whole life doing this. He did want to save Rhaenys, but this rescue was out of guilt, shame, and unwillingness. All kinds of emotions made him uneasy, anxious, and bored, so that he could willingly pay a lot of prices to exchange for the other party's life to bloom again, but this price did not include his entire life. Then we can try another way. The girl, who had been thinking for a while, raised her head and looked at Renly again. The gods can cooperate with you. How to cooperate? The gods help you complete a task, and you help the gods complete a task. This made Renly's expression startled, and he opened his mouth to speak, but the other party did not stop talking. The gods resurrect your friend, and you need to help the gods complete a task, and the next time the gods look for you to cooperate, you help him complete it, then he will help you do something. Mission reward? Such a visual thing made Renly think of this instantly, but the other party's next sentence relaxed this agreement again. The gods do not limit the time of cooperation. You can choose to terminate the cooperation at any time. Compared with the previous cooperation, this kind of cooperation is much better. Renly was thoughtful after hearing it. He asked, is it something within your ability? Or is it still very difficult? For the first cooperation, he can relax the conditions, and he will also give you an extra small gift. The girl said, but for the next cooperation, he will decide what you need to complete, based on the difficulty of the questions you ask, or help you complete an equal task, based on the difficulty of the questions he asks. So what do I need to do this time? Renly asked. Based on this person's attitude, Renly found that the so-called 7 gods did not seem to be able to find anyone to be his agent or partner at will, otherwise it would be impossible for him to bargain. Think about it, this is normal. For hundreds and thousands of years, except for those increasingly corrupt church members, no one has ever heard of anyone claiming to be the messenger of the gods, or anyone doing anything extraordinary. Even the 7 gods themselves have never shown any miracles. Obviously there must be some hidden secrets or restrictions. However, Renly did not intend to pursue this. He thought that the current model sounded fair and reasonable, so he did not intend to climb up. There is a sea wall near the twins where you are, the girl said. It is being harassed by the Ironborn. You need to resolve the crisis there and not let the sea wall be occupied by the Ironborn, not even for a day. These words made Renly's mind quickly flash through all the relevant memories. With his mind racing, he slowly nodded. What about my friend? The previous agreement remains unchanged. He will send your friend to Bravos, the girl replied. Renly was relieved to hear this, but then he thought of another problem. After she is reincarnated, will she retain her original memories? Of course. The girl said, the gods will not actively interfere with your friend's memories. The deal between the gods and the gods is to resurrect your friend, not to turn her into a stranger. So he can interfere with memories? Yes, but don't worry, the gods won't. No. Renly interrupted the girl, remained silent for a moment under the other's strange gaze, and then said, I hope you interfere with her memories. I hope she forgets me. Thank you to the book friend who strives to become a top student, the book friend who is a scumbag, the book friend who is a shadow in the corner, and the book friend who is a wine drinker on the 7th floor for the 100 rewards. Chapter 191 Career Advancement. You have received the gift of the 7 gods, and your knight class has been promoted to Night King. Your related class characteristics have evolved into Leader's Will. The two pieces of information that emerged in his mind one after another quickly sobered up Renly, who was originally in a trance. He looked up and found that he had returned from the Golden Mist Hall to the dim and silent temple of the twins. The previous conversations were still vivid, but there was no one else around. After reaching a preliminary cooperation intention, he was kicked out of that place. At this time, Renly found that he still maintained the posture before entering. The fingertips were erected in front of his eyes, and the blue flames were still burning on them, but they were much smaller than at the beginning, and it seemed that a breeze could blow it out. After taking a look at the flame, Renly pressed it back to his left wrist, and then looked at a new mark on his wrist. The change of occupation was just a small gift in the other party's mouth. The previous conversation allowed him to reach a cooperation agreement with the 7 gods, and the expression of this agreement was that a golden light appeared quietly in the upper left corner of the chaos mark on his left wrist, with a 7-faced divine symbol in one body. The upper left corner, the lower left corner, the upper right corner. 3 small marks appeared in succession on the 4 sides of the chaos mark with crossed arcs, the seed of the ancient road, the fire of the drowned god, and the 7 gods contract, each one more peculiar than the other. A word emerged in Renly's mind involuntarily, plugin. Compared with his own system, these things, including the chaos mark, are really plugins. Not only are their functions extremely special, but they are also obviously beyond common sense. But there will always be a day when plugins will fail, he thought to himself. Although there was no sign of it, Renly could vaguely feel that these things were not really owned by him, but were temporarily boarded here. Otherwise, why couldn't he control them? Otherwise, why couldn't they be displayed in the system panel? Thinking about it, he shook his head and looked at the slender figure still lying quietly in front of him. The plugin on the wrist obviously relies on the existence of the chaos mark. This is the case with the seed of the ancient way, the divinity of the drowned god, and finally the 7 gods contract. Obviously, without this chaos mark, he would not be able to obtain the seed of the ancient way, and it would be impossible to awaken the drowned god of death who has been silent for thousands of years. And the 7 gods, who have never shown any signs of miracles, probably can't find the so-called agents or collaborators. There are many reasons for this conclusion, but the most obvious one is that the 7 gods' resurrection of Rhaenys needs to rely on Renly to carry out, or it needs the new mark on Renly's left wrist to execute. In fact, this kind of execution is not difficult, just reach out and touch it, but such a simple process is indispensable, which can explain a lot of problems, plus the relaxed conditions. What he thought in his heart did not hinder Renly's action. When he knelt down, he took a few last glances at the calm and beautiful face of Rhaenys in front of him. He couldn't help but recall the words she said before she died. After a moment of silence, he raised his left hand and touched the other's forehead. I hope you won't meet someone like me in your next life, and Renly didn't say the rest of the words, because he suddenly didn't know what to say. But this is not important, because when his fingers touched the other's eyebrows, a golden ripple suddenly emanated from the center of his forehead and spread out to completely cover his body. Then Renly saw that a hazy and slender sleeping figure emerged from the dead body, and under the golden light around it, it rose higher and finally completely broke away from the temple building, turning into a golden light that flashed away. Renly therefore attracted his gaze, then looked down, and found that the body had turned into a pile of pale sand and dust and spread out on the ground, tightly wrapped in clothes, looking like a mannequin made of sand. Even if a normal person's soul was stripped away, this would not happen, right? Renly thought, and had a clearer understanding of some of the words he had heard before. But he did not continue to think about those supernatural things, but stood up and threw the sand and dust mannequin around until it could no longer be seen. He then lit the remaining clothes with a candle not far away and finally turned it into a floating ash. After completing the finishing work, he finally let go of this matter. After looking down at the 7 gods symbol on his wrist, he thought about it, then turned around and walked outside the temple to prepare to complete the task he had agreed to do before. However, just as Renly turned around, he suddenly saw a large pool of water accumulated in the entrance area of this dim building. What happened? He couldn't help but frown. Before entering the temple, he did hear some noises, but at that time he was distracted by the waves emitted by the drowned god's fire, and had no chance to pay attention to what was happening behind him. Now it seems. Is there a flood? Carefully avoiding the puddle of water, Renly pushed open the door of the temple and looked outside. Then he found that the situation inside the building was relatively good. The Temple of the Twins is not far from the entrance and exit gates of the castle, standing between the beast shed and the blacksmith shop. It is a 7-sided stone building with steps around it and a high geographical location. However, standing at the door of the temple and looking out, Renly found that the castle's already dirty muddy ground had become muddy at this time. The air was damp and cold, and there were large amounts of water everywhere, as if a heavy rain had just fallen. However, it is winter now, and the twins are not far from the north, unlike the south, and it is impossible to rain in winter. Besides, even if it rains, how can it rain live fish? Glancing at the lively fish that could be seen everywhere on the road in front of the sanctuary, and then looking up at the clear sky, Renly thought of something he had done before, and had a vague guess in his mind. However, he did not continue to ponder this point, but suddenly realized another situation. Why is it so quiet in this castle? Where are the Free family? Have they all run away? But it seems safe here. Why haven't they come back yet? The doubts in his heart made Renly step towards the open city gate not far away. As he kept getting closer, a noisy sound gradually came into his ears. Finally, when he turned a corner and came to the city gate, everything outside the city came into his sight. A large number of Free family members wearing brown robes were gathered on a green lawn outside the castle and quietly confronted another group of people. The leader, Lord Walder Free, sat on a black-backed chair guarded by his children and grandchildren with a gloomy face. There were actually only 3 people who were confronting them, 1 woman and 2 men. All of them had their backs to Renly's direction and their faces could not be seen. However, judging by their clothes, they were obviously members of the Free family. One of them was short and strong, and looked quite familiar to him. Was this an internal conflict? Renly was quite surprised by this, but the next sentence he heard confirmed it, and shocked him deeply. Great-grandmother? You old thing who deserves to go to hell. When Anna and I were in love, you were still drinking milk from my 6th great-grandmother. And you still ask me why? Why don't you ask yourself why you stole my fiancé? Chapter 190 To the lively Free family. The roar outside the twins contained a lot of information, which made Renly subconsciously think of a melodramatic romance drama. At the same time, his originally depressed mood due to the incident of Rhaenys was directly replaced by a mentality of watching the fun. One of the 2 parties in the confrontation was very clear. It was the entire Free family represented by the old Marquis Walder Free of the twins, and Renly was not unfamiliar with the other party. It was the short and strong knight who brought him back to the twins before. He didn't say much, but he had a bad temper. The short and strong knight was also called Walder Free, with the same name as the old Marquis Walder, but the difference was that the young Walder was the great-grandson of the old Marquis Walder, and the other party was both a great-grandmother and a lover. Unfortunately, this drama did not last long, or in other words, a few minutes after he heard that sentence, the confrontation ended quietly, which made Renly quite regretful. Afterwards, he did not figure out the specific cause and effect of the scene. He just relied on his sensitive hearing to vaguely hear that when the castle was flooded, Renly knew this. The young Walder who was having an affair with his great-grandmother did not bother to cover it up, and was seen by many people in a panic, including the old Marquis's stupid grandson. The stupid grandson foolishly told his grandfather about this in public. His grandfather was not sure whether he believed it at first, but later he obviously believed it, and then the confrontation occurred. The final result of this incident was that the young Walder, who was called Black Walder by the Free family, was imprisoned in the castle dungeon, and his so-called lover, the seventh wife of the old Marquis Walder who had been married for more than a year, was hanged in public. The identity of the Marquis Walder's newly born daughter was also obviously suspected, but she was not dealt with without solid evidence. The Free family didn't know how Renly was evaluated, because the old Lord Free was furious. No one in the twins dared to discuss it, or rather, a few people did discuss it, but they were severely whipped after being reported. Then no one dared to gossip about it anymore. But they did have something to talk about the inexplicable flood, about the twins that were damaged by the flood, and about the repair of the bridge on the river. In short, the twins have been very lively in the past 2 days. In this case, Renly, the former distinguished guest, rarely received attention, which made it easier for him to act. The cooperation with the Seven Gods had been confirmed, and the other party had even completed his responsibility in advance, so Renly naturally couldn't be passive. So he was going to solve the problem of Ceylon being besieged by the Ironborn, or to find a way to solve it. He actually had some ideas about it, or had a solution he thought was feasible, but this solution still needed the cooperation of one person. But it was not difficult, because this person was currently in the twins. After some investigation, Renly found the target he was looking for, Patrick Mullister, the heir of Seawall. He was one of the 3 knights chased by the Ironborn that he and Rhaenys met in the village that day, and was later chased by the werewolf. This guy also appeared halfway when Renly was brought back to the twins, hoping to ask for help from the twins. Because it had nothing to do with him before, Renly didn't pay attention to this matter, and didn't know how his request for help went. But when he saw this Patrick Mullister again, just from the look on his face, he could see that his goal had not been achieved, or it had not been achieved for the time being. Lord Free wants me to marry one of his daughters. He said that only then would he consider it. Because they had talked on the way here before, the young noble with thick eyebrows and big eyes and brown hair was no stranger to Renly, and there was no need to keep his words secret. So even though Renly was just a brat of noble birth in his eyes, he still chose not to hide it when asked about it, and even couldn't help but complain. I'm engaged to Hayley of the Bantry family. Although she is of a lower birth, she was promised to me since she was a child, under the witness of the gods in heaven. The Free family couldn't be unaware of this. One of Lord Free's grandsons married the daughter of the Bantry family. How could they not know this? The Bantry family was a wealthy knight family in the Riverlands. Renly knew about this, but he was more interested in the other meanings in this sentence. So have you decided to marry the daughter of the Free family? He asked, thinking that if this was true, it seemed that he would have nothing to do with it. How is that possible? The other party shook his head decisively when he heard it. The sacred marriage contract cannot be abolished, and I will not marry another woman except Hayley. Then aren't you afraid that Seaward will be breached? I'm ready to go to Reveron for help. My lords, the Tully family will never make such an impolite request like me. Will it be in time? It should be in time. The brown-haired young noble answered hesitantly, but then gritted his teeth and said, but I will never marry the daughter of the Free family. This is a matter of honor. My father will never agree with me if he knows it. Renly was speechless when he heard it, thinking that you think the women of the Free family are ugly, but he also saw clearly that this person obviously did not intend to give in, so he changed the subject and decided to speak as planned. So the Free family has the spare capacity to help you? Of course, Lord Renly, do not underestimate the Free family. They rely on, in short, I believe they have the strength to help us get rid of the danger in Seaward. brown-haired Patrick muttered, but they currently claim that they have invested all the troops in the territory into His Majesty Robert's counterattack on the Iron Islands, so they can't squeeze out troops to rescue us at the moment. This is obviously a lie. Lord Renly, if they really don't have the spare capacity, why do they force me to marry their daughter? After arriving in the twins, this man seemed to have endured a lot of humiliation, and even started complaining regardless of Renly's young age. He either said that Lord Free was too cunning, or that the people of the Free family looked like weasels, or that the people of the Free family were all despicable villains. Because the room was located on the top floor of a high tower in the twins, and there was no one else in the stone room, the heir to Seaward had no scruples when speaking. The Malista family of Seagate is quite powerful in the Riverlands, but they are not very populous. There is only one male in this generation. It is no wonder that the Free family covets the position of this fiancé, because as long as this matter is facilitated, the next generation of the Earl of Seagate will have half of the Free family's bloodline. If it is handled properly, the next generation will marry a free girl, which is equivalent to invisibly incorporating the Malista family of Seagate into the branch of the Free family. It is known that the territories of these two families are adjacent. If they really want to have a close relationship, the effect is not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. However, whether it is simple or not has little to do with Renly. Normally, he doesn't bother to care whether the man in front of him marries a weasel wife. The master is weak and the ministers are strong. The power of the Free family is growing. This kind of thing should be a headache for the Tully family, the feudal lord of the Riverlands. How can it be the turn of him, the Duke of Dragonstone? But since there was a deal, he couldn't just sit back and watch. So under the surprised eyes of the brown-haired young man Patrick, the boy who had been listening to him quietly suddenly said, "I have a way for you to not have to marry a Free family woman, and at the same time, allow them to send troops smoothly." Patrick found it quite funny that a child said such words with a serious face. However, due to his status, he didn't dare to laugh out loud, but his expression showed that he didn't take it seriously. However, the next sentence from the boy suddenly changed his expression of disapproval. The Free family colluded with the Ironborn to try to annex the territory of Seagate. How do you think they will react if this news gets out? Chapter 193 Conspiracy and Conspiracy. Colluding with the Ironborn? Surrounded by the 4 rock walls of the house, the surprised voice of the brown-haired young man Patrick sounded quite loud, which frightened the calm Renly, and he quickly signaled the other party to keep quiet. Patrick reacted immediately and asked in a low voice, "This kind of thing, do you have any evidence, sir?" "Of course not." Renly felt that he seemed to have misunderstood something, so he said helplessly, "This is just what I said just now. Where can I find evidence?" "So you..." Patrick understood after hearing what he said. "Are you saying to frame the Free family? It can't be considered a frame up." Renly replied, "Think about it. Is this situation normal now? War situation? Yes, the fleet of the Iron Islands has failed, and the Ironmen in Seaward City have not left yet. Why? What's the use of them taking Seaward City? It can't affect the overall situation at all." Renly said, "To rob property and women? This is also useless. No matter how much he robs now, he can pay back 10 times after the army goes to the Iron Islands. The current situation in Seaward City is tantamount to reckless delay at all costs. It is not good for the overall interests of the Ironmen at all, but has many disadvantages. My father couldn't understand their actions either." Patrick nodded after hearing this. In the end, we can only assume that the leader of the Ironborn was a madman, and the Ironborn who followed him were also madmen. But what does this have to do with the Free family? The actions of a simple madman are naturally incomprehensible, but if someone hired them, then wouldn't it be more reasonable? Renly reminded him, hiring them to deliberately delay time in order to achieve some unspoken purpose? Obviously, this Patrick would also identify himself with the person, and frowned after hearing this. His inner disgust for the Free family made him instinctively want to believe this, but this is just a guess. He replied, "It doesn't explain too much. When we were attacked by the monster that day, we suddenly saw people from the Free family." Renly heard this and said, "According to my observation, the Free family's territory is still a long way from where the monster appeared. Under normal circumstances, they can't appear there at all. They are chasing the monster." Patrick replied, but I found that they were not very enthusiastic about hunting down the monster. Renly said meaningfully, they only shot one arrow before and after, and no one chased after the monster after it ran away. They didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. You mean, if there is no monster, is it normal for the knights of the Free family to run to your family's territory? Not really, but maybe it's because of the war. Yes, because of the war. Maybe they went there to contact the Ironborn? Hunting down the monster is just a disguise? Patrick didn't say anything after hearing this, but lowered his head to think. It sounds like this is indeed the case, or it sounds like the Free family is indeed suspected. And if it is true that the Free family is colluding with the Ironborn, their motive has been revealed, that is, to force themselves, or simply make the Malista family of Sealand disappear, and then covet the large piece of territory that has been vacated. There is a motive, and there are signs of suspicion, but we have no evidence, and we can't be sure that the truth is like this. Patrick subconsciously ignored Renly's age when he spoke, and his face looked solemn. If there is no evidence, then make it up. This sentence startled Patrick, and then he heard the boy say calmly, "You Sealand City has been fighting with the Ironmen for so long. There should be a few Ironman prisoners, right? If you make up some evidence, won't the evidence on the Ironman side come out? As for the Free family, what do you think of the man before?" "Which man?" Patrick asked blankly. "That Black Walder." Renly reminded him. "He will go to hell." Patrick answered without hesitation. "Having an affair with your great-grandmother is shameful, no matter what the reason is. But he has already made evidence." Renly said helplessly. "His fiancée was taken away by Lord Walder, and his fiancée was hanged by Lord Walder. The brother who followed him was also expelled from the Free family. He was imprisoned in the dungeon, and executed only after his father returned. Do you think he still has any loyalty to the Free family? Or do you think the old Lord Free still thinks he has any loyalty?" So, Patrick understood, and his expression was a little moved, but then he shook his head decisively. "No, we don't have solid evidence to prove that the Free family colluded with the Ironborn. It is not an honor to frame them for no reason. What's more, framing them can't save Sealand. It's not a frame up." Renly said, "It's a threat." "What's the difference?" Renly didn't say anything, but handed the other party a piece of parchment that he had written in advance. Patrick took it and looked at it in confusion. He found that it contained all the clues and false accusations from the previous conversation, but it omitted many unnecessary parts. He was stunned. "You go and rescue Black Walder from the dungeon, and then leave this in the dungeon, or in your room. After you disappear without a trace with Black Walder, how do you think the twins will react? They will hunt us down. They will be angry. They will." Patrick had no more words like honor in his mind at this time. Instead, he was moved by this plan, but then he frowned. "But this letter is a handle. This is not written by you, and the handwriting doesn't match. What kind of handle is it?" Renly said. "I also said that this was deliberately forged by them to get rid of suspicion afterwards." Patrick subconsciously opened his mouth to say something, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he held the letter and fell into deep thought again. He had never thought of using this conspiracy to throw dirty water to threaten the Free family before, but it seemed very likely to succeed now. Telling the other party all their conspiracies and schemes, and then disappearing, is equivalent to directly launching a threat. "You don't know when my patience will run out to implement this plan of throwing dirty water, or I'm already on the way to implement this plan of throwing dirty water. You may choose to send someone to intercept, but whether you can find the person or not, you can't be sure who I will find to throw dirty water on you. Is it the Tully family of the Riverlands? Or King Robert, who is currently stationed in Lannister Harbor? You can also ignore this threat and not take it seriously, but if Sea Marsh is really broken by the Ironborn, then someone will always be responsible for it after the war, and there will always be cake to appease. Your Free family was not very active during King Robert's uprising, and it was even more of a thorn in the eyes of the Tully family. In addition, my heir to Sea Marsh and other evidences testify that this matter is not yours. You may hope that other nobles will stand up and speak for you, but I'm sorry, your Free family has never had a good reputation in the noble circle. Besides, if the war is really over, King Robert's reputation will surely rise to a higher level. It's not very wise to stand up and oppose at this time. You say you are innocent? You may have evidence to prove your innocence. How is this possible? When the time comes, everyone hopes that you are not innocent. So how can you be innocent? So, before I completely throw dirty water on you, why don't you send troops to reinforce Sealand City and wash away all the suspicion and consequences? Why stay at home, waiting to die? It's just, I can't rescue Blackwalder from the dungeon of the twins. The desire that grew in Patrick's heart was replaced by dejection. Although the dungeon of the twins is not well defended, I can't rescue anyone by myself. Blackwalder is an important link. It's not that it really needs to lure that person to the evidence camp that is opposite to the Free family, but at least he should be rescued and then disappear with him. Only in this way can the threat be established, otherwise there is a lack of favorable evidence. However, how can he do it alone? Under normal circumstances, this is naturally difficult. Renly nodded and then tapped the surface of the wooden table in front of him with his fingers. But what if there is another flood outside the twins? Patrick was stunned when he heard this, and then he realized it and stared at the boy's face with horror. Chapter 194, Flood returns. Old Walder of the twins may make some excessive demands on you, Patrick. You must be prepared. But remember, you are the heir of the Malista family of Seagate, not a bastard who can be trampled on at will. When leaving Seagate, his father's words made Patrick take a deep breath of the night air. Walking on the road in the castle, he was nervous, but his face tried to remain calm. Breaking through, being hunted, fleeing, encountering that monster, and finally only escaping by himself, asking for help, being coerced, ready to give up, and then there was a turn for the better. These days' experiences are more complicated than what he encountered in the past 10 years, but they also made Patrick's mentality more mature than that of an ordinary teenager. There is more than honor in this world that needs to be protected, he thought to himself. The Battle of Seagate is still vivid in his mind, and that fully proves this point. Originally, they were in the upper hand, but the Ironmen were too cunning. Facing the solid defense of Heijiang City, they did not choose to attack by force. Instead, they scattered in all directions to sweep the surrounding villages, causing a lot of tragedies. They also got catapults from somewhere and threw the bodies of the dead civilians one after another into the castle that was strictly guarded. Old, young, 7 or 8-year-old girls, and infant boys in swaddling clothes. This alone was enough to make people's eyes split, not to mention that the dead were all relatives of the soldiers defending the city. When the war broke out, the young and middle-aged were summoned by the Lord to defend the city. The civilians around the castle would also enter the city for refuge, but those farther away would choose to stay in their hometowns and wait, because under normal circumstances, the Ironmen would not dare to go so far. However, they went deep. What made them so courageous? So radical? Patrick was not sure. He only knew that in the face of the increasingly turbulent situation in the castle, his father had to choose to give up the defensive advantage and take the initiative to attack. However, those cunning iron bastards had already set a trap, so that they suffered heavy losses and had to retreat back to defend themselves, but their morale was greatly reduced. Recalling everything that happened not long ago, recalling all the clues, Patrick walked faster, and his originally hesitant mood instantly became firm. However, when he turned a corner and saw a tall tower building in the twins, his originally firm mood hesitated again. Will the flood that the strange little Duke Renly claimed will really come as promised? Or was the flood that happened 2 days ago really caused by the wizard partner he mentioned? Thinking back to the past, he could only barely remember that the partner the boy mentioned seemed to be a tall and thin young man, and then he seemed to be poisoned, and then he disappeared on the day the flood came. It's mysterious enough, Patrick thought, just like the little Duke. It seemed that this gave him some confidence, so he took a deep breath and stepped towards the tall tower. That was the building where the dungeon of Luon City was located. The conversation during the day lasted for a long time, and in the end, they had considered the matter thoroughly. Their plan was to enter the dungeon in the name of visiting an old friend to approach the target. The jailer might not let him in, but being in the twins, they were probably not vigilant. As long as Patrick bribed them a little, this would not be a difficult problem. Then, when visiting, the jailer would not let him run in by himself. At least there would be someone following him, and this person might have the key, but he might not. This was a risk, so Patrick had to confirm this in advance when entering the hall where the jailer was. Thinking of this, he subconsciously pinched a hard ring in his palm. It was the thing that the little duke gave him to deal with emergencies, and it was said to have miraculous effects. In addition to these, the difficulty for Patrick was the chaos that might occur later. How to disguise the prisoners, and how to take advantage of the chaos to cover people out without being chased immediately. Hope it goes well. When he pushed open the door of the tower, the oncoming gazes made Patrick's heart tremble. If he could rescue people, he would immediately rush to Reveron, the home of the Tully family, which would not hinder his original plan to seek help from Reveron. However, would it really be too late to go to Reveron for help? This thought flashed through his mind, and the young brown-haired noble gritted his teeth and approached. In the other direction of the castle, Renly was standing in a room at the top of a high tower, looking out the window at the starry sky. There is a time distinction in Westeros: wolf time, owl time, bat time. Although this distinction is very vague, at least there is a rough standard. So he was silently waiting for the arrival of the agreed time. Conspiracy, overt conspiracy, throwing dirty water, or indeed, he did not think about this question at this time. Renly was not sure whether this plan would succeed in the end. And if this plan did not succeed, then he should go to the seaborder city once. Thinking of this, he felt that the time was about right, so he raised his hand to dig out the flame on his left wrist and held it in front of his eyes. The deep blue divinity of the drowned god was as weak as a small flame burning at the top of a thin candle. It was lit on the tip of Renly's right index finger and trembled slightly as he stared at it. The ordinary wind could not affect the flame at all, but when the boy looked at it for a moment and uttered a word, the flame shook for a moment and then looked more hazy. Nothing special happened around. The night was very quiet, and the biggest sound from all directions was the rushing river flowing at a high speed under the castle. It was grey and dark under the night sky, and it looked like a river flowing from the bottom of the building to the abyss. However, as time passed, an abnormal situation emerged at the end of the river. The water flow converged, the waves roared, and under the dim moonlight, the huge flood was like a ferocious prehistoric beast, rushing towards the narrow stone bridge and took castles standing on the river from the end of the site, and it became bigger and bigger as it got closer, but it did not collapse and scatter under the restraint of a mysterious force. The surging water made a loud noise, and the soldiers on the walls of the twins who were drowsy from the night watch were stimulated and woke up in a short while. Then they screamed in panic at the mysterious phenomenon that emerged again. Soon after, a rapid bell sounded in the castle, and the narrow windows of the extinguished towers also lit up with dim lights. A disturbance that was either vague or obvious emerged and spread rapidly. Men and women in dishevel ran out of various buildings again in panic, and then screamed and rushed towards the closed castle gate. The hounds in the cages barked wildly, the crows screamed on the treetops, and a large number of footsteps sounded in a disorderly manner. The chaos and noise spread throughout the castle. Under the influence of roars and screams, the gates were finally forced to open, and the crowd rushed to the exit. The panicked figures seemed quite anxious and obviously had no rationality at all. The boy on the tower stood in front of the window and quietly overlooked everything below, and finally showed a satisfied smile. The last experience proved that the best way to deal with such sudden disasters is to hide in high places and not come out. After the flood is over, nothing will happen naturally. However, in the face of such a mysterious event, how many people can remain calm? There is still one chapter before the evening. Chapter 195: The Cursed Twins. What happened in the past few days? When Merry, who was soaked to the skin, took his wife and 2 daughters to the grass outside the city, to gather with everyone under the cover of night, his brain, which was aching from a hangover, was thinking about this question. The inexplicable flood, the hanged Marcos, the imprisoned Black Walder, and another flood. In just 2 or 3 days, it was more exciting than what he had experienced in most of his life. If it weren't for the monster incident before, Merry dared to say that this was the most complicated period of his life. However, because he drank too much, he didn't feel any fear now, but felt that everything was absurd. The noisy sounds around were a bit like the port market. Every familiar face here was afraid. The fat Ryman Free was the eldest son of his elder brother and the second heir of the Free family. In the past, this direct descendant of the Free family had an arrogant and rude temper. In recent days, he had become much more depressed because of his son Black Walder. Now, Merry found that he had turned into a trembling fat chicken. In the dim night, barefoot and hugged his arms, staring blankly at the family castle not far away that had been washed by the flood again. His thick lips were no longer as rosy as before, but were full of paleness. Perhaps he was also reminded of something by the scene. On the other side, his younger brother also, who had a pair of cross-eyed eyes, and was cunning and cruel in Merry's eyes, no longer had the self-righteous smugness on his face. He looked at the end of the hazy Green Fork River in the dark night, with a distraught expression on his face, as if he had suffered a serious blow. These two were still good, at least they could keep a basic calm, but the others were not so stable. They were talking in fear, trembling, and wetting their pants, wondering if their family was cursed by some evil curse. If there is a first time, there will be a second time. If there is a second time, there will be a third time. No, this place is too unlucky. I have to go back to Casterly Rock. Lord Tywin's sister, Jenna Lannister, the second sister-in-law from the Lannister family, muttered in the crowd, scaring a little daughter of the third family to burst into tears, but the adults around were not much better than the child. They turned pale, because of this sentence, with worries or fear in their eyes. No, we can't live here. A trembling voice came from the side. Merry turned his head, and saw that his wife, who came from a prominent family in the Riverlands, also looked unhappy. I want to go back to Derry City to live for a while, with my two daughters. She said so, making Merry subconsciously shift his gaze. One of the two daughters his wife had mentioned, was now in her arms. She didn't look that bad. The pink tender looking baby even raised her hands, to stroke her mother's black hair, and giggled without worry. Merry's eldest daughter was also held in his wife's hand. She stared around with a blank look on her face. They all looked fine, so Merry said, "Father, you will understand what I did." His wife stared at him, and said in an unquestionable tone. Merry secretly lamented that his wife was an arrogant and aggressive woman. The Derry family she came from was once quite favored by the Targaryen royal family, but it was because of this that they became staunch royalists. After Robert's rebellion, most of their land and wealth were confiscated, and their power was greatly reduced, becoming a second-rate family in the Riverlands. Unfortunately, the reduction in the strength of her family did not affect the temper of this unruly woman, or it could be said that Merry himself was not very good. The trauma of his brain made him feel a splitting headache with just a slight knock, not to mention taking a tough attitude to quarrel with his wife. So he could only shut up and stop talking. The mess finally calmed down as time passed. In the cold night, a large group of Frees stood outside the castle shivering and waiting for a long time. After finding that there seemed to be nothing wrong with the Green Fork River, they finally ran back with courage, and then the second, the third. Merry went back with the large group, but on the way back, he suddenly found that there seemed to be some commotion in the castle. He was a little surprised, but at this time his fierce wife was constantly nagging beside him, so that he had no time to pay attention to anything else. But not long after, he heard a very special news. Black Walder has escaped. The elder brother, Danwell, who was born to the same mother, had always taken good care of Merry, who had a brain injury. Now he came to talk about this matter late at night. Merry always thought that his brother was a good man, but he looked uglier than himself because he had a missing front tooth. I heard someone rescued him. Who? Merry asked curiously. As the blood of the first wife of the old Lord Free, Black Walder's succession order was not low in the entire Free family. At the same time, he was strong and rude. In the past, many people in the family were vying to curry favor with him. But after the incident was exposed, he became a street rat and was despised by people who would still want to save him now. Even if Black Walder's grandfather, the eldest son of Lord Free, had not gone to participate in the war against the Iron Islands and had not returned yet, the old lord wanted to wait for him to come back before launching the family trial, and Black Walder would have been beheaded long ago. I don't know. The elder brother shook his head and said, but father is very angry about this. When I passed by the hall, I even heard him start to curse, and it seems that he asked people to chase him. If it were me, I would be angry too. Merry muttered quietly, but did not dare to say anything. However, everyone knew about this, and his elder brother Danwell would naturally understand what Merry said. However, he scratched his head and looked confused. But he cursed not only Blackwalder, but also Mallister. Mallister? Merry was quite surprised to hear this. In the past 2 days, he heard that the heir of the Mallister family came to ask for help, saying that their sealand city was being attacked by the Ironmen. Merry didn't know the specific situation, but he didn't agree with the Free family sending troops to help them. When there was nothing to do, Earl Mallister looked down on their Free family. Now that there was something wrong, he came to ask for troops. How could such a good thing happen in the world? But, has the sealand city reached the point where it had to ask for help? He was a little confused about this. Although the Frees and the Mallisters were neighbors, they were actually quite close. In the past, the two families did not visit each other very often, and there was not much news to be heard on a daily basis. The last time Merry heard about the Mallisters was a month ago. It was said that their territory was being harassed by a small group of Ironmen, but it seemed that the scale was not large, and it was no different from the Ironmen harassing other coastal territories. But now, however, he did not take this matter seriously. Whether the Ironmen harassed or not had nothing to do with the Frees. This was not the era of the River Islands Kingdom, when the Ironmen ruled the Riverlands and the Iron Islands. The poor ghosts from the Western Islands would at most rob the fishing villages and territories on the mainland, and would never come to them. Unfortunately, the next day, Merry's idea suddenly changed. The Ironmen could not come to their twins, but he did not know what his old father was thinking. He actually announced in the morning that he would recruit soldiers to support the seafront. Since Jason Mallister sent his son to ask for help, it means that Seaside City can't hold on for much longer. In the hall of the Free family, the bold old man sitting on the black oak high back chair spoke expressionlessly to the group of children and grandchildren below. No matter what the relationship was in the past, our two families are both vassals of the Tully family, good ministers of King Robert, and we are all family. Since Mallister is in trouble, our Free family naturally can't just stand by and watch. Family members? The people around him were stunned by the words of the old Marquis Free, and Merry was also a little confused about this. Is there something wrong with his ears? Or is he dreaming now? When did his old father, who would never release the eagle without seeing the rabbit, realize this? And if I remember correctly, wasn't he still cursing the so-called family member yesterday? Thank you to Book Friends Zianatang 246, Book Friends I'm Yuan and Book Friends 124 Simple 865 for the 100 rewards. Chapter 196 Leader's Will. Thin snowflakes drifted down from the gloomy sky, covering the grey earth with a white tint, but it did not affect the bustle of the twins. The children in the castle were looking for rotten riverfish that were washed in by the flood, while the adults were busy cleaning the dirty places in the castle. One ox cart after another transported all kinds of garbage out, and brought some supplies in. The clanking sound of metal and rock colliding could be heard faintly from the direction of the long bridge outside the castle, and occasionally there were bursts of shouting. It was the stonemasons hired by the Free family who were repairing the damaged bridge under the twins. In the room in the high tower, looking at the busy little figures below for a while, it felt a little cold around, so Renly tightened his cotton clothes. After the disaster, the Frees went to the seaward city to participate in the war, so that the castle, which originally seemed crowded, suddenly became much more spacious. Without the idle people who wander around every day, the children seem to be much quieter, or they have left a lot. It is said that many of them have followed their mothers to their mother's house to stay and play temporarily. Renly is happy to see this, because before, there were always some little brats who came to invite him to go out and play. He could pretend to be sick and ignore them once or twice, but it would be inappropriate if it happened too many times. It's not that you have to look at the mood of those children, but mainly because those children can't come on their own initiative. There are naturally other people behind them, even the old Marquis Free's intention. The purpose is naturally to get closer, but he keeps being rejected. Even if the person involved is a child, he will definitely be unhappy if it happens too many times. But he doesn't have time to pay more attention to himself now, right? Renly thought secretly. The situation is urgent. The Free family had to send troops to support the sea frontier city, but it is obvious that they can't really be happy about it. At least, Renly heard the servants claim that their Lord Free was sending people to hunt down the fleeing Blackwalder, and if Blackwalder really asked them to capture him, then even if the reinforcement arrived near the seafront city, they would probably withdraw. But this possibility is not great. After all, the slogans were so loud. Thinking of this, he turned around and picked up a silver mirror on the table not far away and looked down at it. The transaction with the 7 gods was basically over, but a little side effect after the transaction made Renly have to pay attention. That is, his changed profession or professional characteristics. Leaders will, when you make actions that conform to the spirit of chivalry, you and the knights in your same camp will receive the blessing of the corresponding belief power. The knight profession became the Night King, and the characteristics changed from single person blessing to multi-person blessing. Renly didn't know how the scope of the same camp was specifically classified, but he was worried about one thing at this time, that is, whether normal knight behavior could provide experience for the Night King profession. Do I have to be a leader? He muttered quietly, secretly feeling that the 7 gods seemed a bit meddling. After all, it was easy to level up a knight, but to be a leading knight, he didn't know what would happen, and it would definitely become very troublesome. However, for the time being, he was not sure about this, so he didn't care much. He shifted his gaze and was about to observe other attributes, but the visit of the steward of the Free family interrupted Renly's actions. I bring you the sincere greetings from Master Free, Lord Renly. I'm sorry to have frightened you in the twins during this period, but please rest assured that there will be no more unexpected situations in the future. The steward of the Free family was a guy with a pair of cross-eyed, short, and fat, and looked more like a weasel than most Frees. Renly learned that this man was actually one of the sons of Vault Free. He forgot which son it was, mainly because that man had too many sons. Recently, things have been busy, and Master Free has not slept well. Please forgive me for neglecting you. I don't know what he was thinking, but the weasel steward's attitude on the surface was at least very qualified. However, his words sounded like he was just trying to coax a child. Renly didn't say much after hearing this, and responded politely and childishly that it was okay. Then he heard the fat weasel start to say some nagging words in his ear. Generally speaking, it was still fooling the child. Every word of this guy more or less mentioned how difficult it was for the Free family, how honored it was to receive you, the little duke, and hoped that King Robert could also feel their family's attentive mood. However, there was no lack of key points in his words. At least he stated 2 things. The Free family was currently short of manpower and could not arrange too many people to send Renly to Highgarden for the time being. It was not safe to have too few people, so they hoped that Renly would stay here for a while. The second thing was more interesting. The other day, a traitor appeared in the Free family. He threatened our Marquis not to tell anyone and yelled at the old Marquis. You saw the whole process, my lord. The weasel butler did not seem embarrassed when he said this, probably because he thought that a child might not understand anything about it. The traitor escaped and might go to King Robert to frame our Free family. If this is true, please help us to testify at that time. Looking for witnesses to find the murderer here? Renly secretly felt funny, but on the surface he nodded seriously. Please tell Lord Walder that the Free family has given us such a grand hospitality. If this is true, I will definitely stand up to help. Besides, it is not to help, but to tell the truth. Such a little adult's attitude surprised the weasel butler, but he did not think much about it. After continuing to nag for a few more words, he left with satisfaction. Obviously, the last sentence is the key point. The Free family is probably afraid that, even if the danger of Seafront City is lifted, and even if they send troops, Melista will go to complain. Although this will not bear the consequences of Seafront City being destroyed, it will also attract some suspicion and even hostile eyes. However, shaking his head, Renly stopped thinking about it, and continued to look down at his mirror. The personal attributes revealed by the attribute panel are no different from usual, nothing more than 2 professions and a bunch of knowledge and skills. Generally speaking, except for the ocean aspect, it is just a human elite template. After thinking carefully for a while, Renly looked at his left wrist. Compared with the clear personal attributes, these plugins are not very clear one by one. The chaos mark in the core of the wrist continues to breed the seeds of the ancient road, and he already has 7 of these seeds. The fire of the drowned god that exists with the chaos mark has been weak after 2 floods, but it has not dissipated. It just needs to be nurtured. Renly dare not use it casually, because he is afraid that he will really lose it. There was no movement in the 7 gods contract. After all, the first transaction had not been completed, but Renly felt that the gods and humans had different concepts of time. Even if it was completed, the frequency of the 7 gods contacting him through this object would probably not be too frequent. However, Renly could take the initiative to come to the door. What could he do if he came to the door? He pondered secretly. For now, he only knew that the other party could make people reincarnate, and that seemed to be the function of the Holy Mother among the 7 gods. He didn't know much about the others. Thinking about it, he vaguely remembered other things in his mind. For now, returning to High Garden to grow up quietly, and entering the dungeon to figure out the matter of Rhea and the Son of Chaos were what he was going to do next. But in addition to that, he thought he should do something beyond the plan. It is necessary to set up an intelligence department. Looking at everything busy outside the tower, Renly pondered in his heart. If he hadn't come out to take a look, he would have thought that the world was still the same as before. However, now there are werewolves and ancient people, which obviously exceeds his inherent impression. Renly thought that he had to catch the movements of these things. Although his ideal is to be a traveler, this premises that the base camp is stable. After all, no matter what, if the Baratheon dynasty falls into turmoil, he, a member of the family, obviously cannot escape the fate of strife. Then he must take everything into his own hands until he has the power to ignore it all. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197 Joffrey. All the undercurrents related to the battlefield of Heijiang City are surging here, while the real battlefield over there has been brewing and is now ready to go. Knights and soldiers from all over Westeros gathered in Lannister Port, an important city in the western border. Under the good command and dispatch of the major lords, they boarded the prepared River Bay warships and began to adapt. Tomorrow morning, they will embark on the water counterattack the Iron Islands. Some are nervous, some are excited, and some are accustomed to it. Most people are still optimistic about the outcome of this war. After all, the difference in strength between the two sides is too great. However, optimism is optimistic, but whether they can get out of the war unscathed, or even earn credit and glory, is a matter of all efforts. Not to mention glory, in front of their lives. No soldier dares to be careless. Relatively speaking, the lords who commanded the soldiers felt quite relaxed about this. After the transport fleet arrived at Lannister Port, the River Bay nobles on it naturally arrived in the city of their good neighbors in the western border. The Duke of Mace of Reach claimed at a military meeting that this war could not fail, and that the most important thing for them now was to rush to the Iron Islands with the force of thunder and beat those iron bastards into a pulp. This plan of not caring about anything and rushing forward directly attracted many people's approval and also caused the criticism of several people who were proficient in war, but it did not cause any waves because King Robert, who was in charge of the overall situation, was not so careless. King Robert was a careless person, and he led his army to fight in a straightforward and overwhelming style, like a storm sweeping away. But that did not mean that he was not cautious, or that he was not cautious in war. So he directly ignored the Duke of Mace's proposal, and chose to listen to the opinions of several other lords, to arrange the counterattack plan and key points. During the period of preparation before the war, they had basically finalized the battle plan. Stannis Baratheon led his army to attack Great Wyke, while the captain of the Kingsguard Barristan Selmy led his troops to attack Old Wyke, and the remaining lords were responsible for other islands, and finally counterattacked the core of the Iron Islands, Pike. The general policy was determined, but the specific aspects needed to be discussed continuously. However, as the departure time was getting closer, the plan had been perfected. After the last battle meeting, everything was ready, and the lords left the hall to do their own things, and the young King Robert began to deal with some things other than war. Some unidentified people have appeared in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms. King Robert couldn't help laughing. After listening to the news from the chief intelligence officer Varys, wasn't there a guy who claimed to be Tywin's ancestor a while ago, similar to that? We can't know yet. The bald intelligence chief Varys laughed. It is said that there is also a woman who claims to be Mega's reincarnation. That's new. Robert touched his chin when he heard it. Who is he? Varys coughed dryly and was about to make a humorous reply, but the other party waved his hand. Forget it. A bunch of circus clowns who came from nowhere can't cause any trouble, so don't pay any attention to them. Seeing this, the bald intelligence chief began to talk about the second thing. The peasants in the royal forest reported that a group of wild boars have been very active in the forest recently. Something unusual may have happened. They hope that your majesty can send someone to deal with this matter. That must be because we don't have time to go hunting. Robert said cheerfully, the wild boars miss the barking of our dogs. Obviously, such a small matter is not worth paying attention to, so Varys continued. One of our insiders in the Iron Islands claims that news of miracles in the son of the drowned god is spreading in the islands, and that the son of the drowned god can resurrect the dead. Resurrection of the dead. Robert's mind moved, but then he waved his hands in a rather absurd way. Charlatans, clowns, liars, wild boars. This world is really getting more and more chaotic. Gots, Varys, can't you say something useful? The Free family sent a letter claiming that Lord Renly is now visiting their twins. They said, is that old man Walder Free confused? Robert said unhappily after hearing this, my little brother is staying in Highgarden honestly. How could he appear in old Walder's broken castle? They claim to have rescued Lord Renly from a kidnapper. The intelligence chief said as he took out a parchment letter from his sleeve and then presented it with both hands. Robert raised his eyebrows when he saw this, took it and unfolded it to look at it, and his face gradually darkened. Let the White Walkers catch him. What is Mace Tyrell doing? He actually took my little brother to the Shield Islands? The parchment letter clearly wrote down everything that Renly had said when he lied to the Free family before. He was kidnapped on the island, went all the way to Seawall near the twins, and was finally rescued and sent to the twins. Because of Rhaenys' disappearance, the Free family directly took the credit for saving Renly in the letter. They thought that no one else saw it anyway, and even if the boys said that someone else saved him later, King Robert probably wouldn't believe it. However, Renly didn't know about this little trick. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care, and he might even be more happy about it, because it was equivalent to the Free family directly taking the blame for his whereabouts. As for Robert, he clearly saw the seal of the Free family on the letter, so he naturally wouldn't regard it as nonsense anymore. But it was precisely because of this that he felt quite annoyed. Call Tyrell to me. I want to ask him in person. What on earth is he thinking about taking a 6-year-old child to the battlefield? Varys bowed and left, and soon returned with the burly Duke of Mace. However, the Duke of Mace was at a loss for words when asked by the young king. I received your letter, your majesty. He said blankly, you claimed that you wanted me to take Renly to the battlefield to see the world, so I took him to the Shield Islands. Later, he fell ill. When did I write such a letter? Robert interrupted him in surprise. Are you mistaken? This made the Duke of Mace even more confused, because he felt that this was a trivial matter, so he didn't mention it much when he saw that the king didn't ask about it. After all, pretending to be sick and staying on the island can be seen at a glance. What is the plan? But he didn't expect that now. Question mark? But the letter clearly has your seal on it, your majesty, and it is also clearly written by Grand Maester Pycelle. How could he be wrong? Impossible. I didn't ask Pycelle to write this letter. How stupid can one be to ask a 6-year-old to go to the battlefield? But maybe it's the Grand Maester's problem, your majesty. Seeing that the two of them couldn't figure it out for a while, Varys on the side couldn't help but whispered, maybe Grand Maester Pycelle made a mistake, or the bad guys took advantage of it. You know, the Grand Maester is too old, and his vigilance is inevitably insufficient. He has so many dogs in the tower, how could someone take advantage of it? Robert asked back after hearing this, but he also saw clearly that the Duke of Mace in front of him was also a victim, so he gritted his teeth and said, "Kidnapping, forged letter, there must be something hidden here." As he spoke, he glanced at the Duke of Mace on the side, and then said to Varys, "Send someone to investigate this matter. I want to find out who is targeting my brother." The meaning was already very clear. When Varys nodded, the Duke of Mace beside him also hurriedly claimed that he would also conduct a corresponding investigation, so this matter was decided temporarily. Then the Duke of Mace took his leave, and the chief intelligence officer reported the last thing, which was also the family affairs of the young king. Regarding the naming of the prince, the queen wrote to ask for your opinion. Didn't I tell her last time? Let her make the decision on such a small matter. Robert waved his hand impatiently and said, "My son hasn't been born yet. Why are you thinking about the name? That woman is idle all day long. Her Majesty said that, if it is a boy, she wants to name the child Joffrey, so she asks for your consent." Joffrey? There are only 2 chapters today, and the next year will be skipped soon, so I need to sort out the subsequent plot lines. Chapter 198 Return to High Court. Although the Free family claimed that they were short of manpower because they went to support Sea Reach, in fact, when their people returned from Sea Reach, they did not immediately set out to send Renly to the Reach. There were no accidents in the war in Sea Reach. When the Free family's army appeared there, the besieged Ironmen wisely evacuated directly, without the previous entanglement. And the bigger wars in the distance also frequently brought good news. Great White Island, Old White Island, Oak Island, Harlow Island. The 31 islands of the Iron Islands were successively occupied by the huge army that landed in Westeros, and the Ironman nobles on them also suffered heavy casualties. Until the last Pike Island. Renly could not understand the specific process. He only knew that Pike Island also failed to stop this army, so the rebellion ended in failure. Balon Greyjoy, who was crowned as the king of the Iron Islands, had to lay down his crown and surrender, but he also had to pay a price for it. One of his 3 sons died in the battle, one was taken back to King's Landing as a hostage, and one was sent to the north as an adopted son. In fact, the price Balon paid was not limited to this. The nobles of the island suffered heavy casualties, the castles in various places were smashed to pieces by siege equipment, and the many people and territories were destroyed and plundered by the army. Although he already knew what the outcome of the war would be, and although he had already planned to surrender, who would believe that he would really be defeated if he didn't pay these prices? Relatively speaking, the rebellion did not bring much change to the continent of Westeros. Some coastal territories were only deserted by the Ironborn. Most of the armies of the lords and nobles did not suffer any serious damage, except for the destruction of the Lannister family's fleet at the beginning. These were what Renly heard during his time at the Free family, but no one else took the initiative to tell him. In fact, although the Free family treated him very politely, Renly's age still made him not be taken seriously here. He did not care about it, and in fact, Renly did not live in the Free family for too long. When the news of Balon's surrender came back, the twins prepared to send Renly away. However, their destination was not Highgarden, which was too far away, and there were too many noble territories passing by, which was not convenient, so they planned to send Renly to Lannister Port in the west, where a tournament would be held later, to celebrate the victory of the war. The Duke of Mace of the Reach would also watch the tournament there. In the winter of the year 285 of the Conquest era, a simple but solid carriage set out from the twins, escorted by many knights and crossbowmen, and headed towards the west. During the journey, they stopped and started, and stayed for 2 days, when they arrived at Riverrun, the home of the Tully family, the Lord of the Riverlands. Then the Freeze escort team was replaced by the Tully family. This might be a confrontation between 2 families that disliked each other, but it had no effect on Renly. So after about 2 months, he finally arrived at Lannister Harbor in the west. At this moment, the tournament was basically declared over. Renly, who caught up with the tale, only saw Jaime Lannister, one of the golden twins of the Lannister family, in the tournament, showing off his power in the tournament field, and basically did not see other contestants. That's right, the winner of this tournament was Jaime. After arriving, Renly met his 2 cheap brothers, but they did not arouse their suspicion. Robert only thought that someone was plotting against Renly, and Stannis did not say much after carefully asking him some details. The matter seemed to have been muddled through. Renly did not know the results of the subsequent investigation because he boarded a ship again to return to Highgarden just 2 days after arriving at Lannister Port. Thin snowflakes slowly drifted down from the gloomy sky and finally landed on the grey bridge beneath his feet to form a light white spot. The fat boy standing on the bridge watching this sighed melancholy and whispered to the brown-haired boy who was much taller than him, "If only the snow was heavier, Willis, we could build a snowman to welcome Renly back. The snow in Highgarden is always of this scale." Standing on the bridge outside the beautiful castle, the brown-haired boy raised his hand to pat the few snowflakes falling on his shoulders and said slowly, "Besides, don't you always say that you hate Renly? Building a snowman to welcome him? I guess the point should be building a snowman, right?" The fat boy blushed a little when he heard this, but he still retorted, "I heard that he was kidnapped. Of course I have to be nice to him. My mother said this is the most basic courtesy." This made a silver-haired lady standing not far away glance at the fat man sideways, and some other men and women around him who were dressed in gorgeous clothes also laughed. However, the conversation between the children did not interest the adults too much. At this time, they were looking at the several ships slowly approaching in the wide river beside the bridge with expectation. The war was over, but the relevant matters left to the Seven Kingdoms were not terminated. At least, King's Landing must distribute benefits to the parties that made outstanding contributions in this war. It is said that His Majesty Robert intends to dispatch the Lord of the River Bay, Mace Tyrrell, to King's Landing as the Minister of Finance. However, this news has not been clearly confirmed, but at least through this sudden outbreak of war, the situation of the River Bay in the new dynasty will be much better, and it will not be labeled as a loyal minister of the previous dynasty as before. And all this was achieved by their head, Duke Mace, who led the soldiers of the River Bay to fight bloody battles on the battlefield. So the Tyrrell family members who stayed in High Court were naturally excited about this person's return. So when the ship finally docked, and the passengers on it got off one after another, these people all called up. The adults were asking each other about their well-being, while the children were surrounding the black-haired boy who had followed the Duke of Highgarden off the boat, asking all sorts of questions. Who kidnapped you, Renly? What does he look like? Did you really go from the Shield Islands to the Riverlands? What do the Frees look like? Did you run into any Ironborn? There were so many boring questions like these, and the people surrounding him were not limited to the two direct descendants of the Tyrrell family. The long and boring journey gave Renly a lot of patience to respond to them, but in fact, all of this was just nonsense. Mother said that someone was obviously targeting you this time, so you must never be allowed to go out again. After sending away the little brats, the brown-haired boy, who seemed a little more stable to Renly, said something to him meaningfully. "What do you think about this, Renly?" "Not really." Renly glanced at the gloating expression and said, "I've been running around for the past year, and I'm tired of seeing those Ironmen, hedge knights, village witches, and other miscellaneous things. It's really boring to think about it, you know. I even saw a wolf that looked like a human." After he said this, he no longer paid attention to the other party, but took the initiative to run to the adults to greet the Duchess. The Duchess had just hugged her husband and saw this and hurriedly asked about her well-being. The brown-haired boy stood there, his expression becoming a little depressed. "What's wrong with you, Willis?" The fat boy next to him, Garland, had been blinking his eyes and waiting for Renly to take the initiative to greet him, but Renly ignored him, which made him a little depressed and a little empathetic. "Are you mad at him? A wolf that looks like a human? Do you think he is lying?" Willis did not answer this question, but stared at the black-haired figure not far away and whispered, "A wolf is a wolf, how can it look like a human? So he is lying. But I feel he is not lying. You must feel it wrong." The little fat man curled his lips and said, "How can such a freak exist? I can't even imagine what it looks like. Maybe." Willis nodded hesitantly and then saw the team walking towards the castle and hurriedly called his brother to follow. The snow was slowly drifting all over the sky, and the beautiful castle located on the top of the hill by the river was decorated like a fairy tale world. A group of bright and beautiful noblemen and women entered through the open gates, laughing and talking all the way. This is a warm and harmonious picture, and it is also the norm for many lords and nobles who returned home after the war. However, in many dark corners inside and outside Westeros, undercurrents are silently surging and brewing, vowing to break all this stability. The next chapter will be released a little later, and the proofreading is not finished yet. Chapter 199 Undercurrent. Pain, severe pain, heart-wrenching pain. The constant waves of pain all over his body made Blackwalder tremble in the corner of the house. He felt as if he was being torn apart, which was unbearable. However, for some reason, he could not faint. The simple thatched house could not completely block the cold wind. The small snow that was spreading in the river bend turned into heavy snow in the river area close to the north. The coldness caused a thin layer of ice crystals to form on the surface of the water tank in the house, silently revealing the temperature at this time. However, Blackwalder in the straw pile was sweating profusely, as if he was in a suffocating furnace. His thick cotton jacket was torn open unconsciously, revealing his strong wheat-colored chest, and also revealing a black scar that seemed to have been scratched by a wolf's claws. Blackwalder used to care about this scar very much, because he knew the consequences of being scratched, but now he had no time to care about it. The endless pain made his mind blurred, and the rolling sweat stains soaked his eyes, so that he could not see everything around him clearly. He seemed to have a high fever, but the cold wind blowing in from the cracks in the wall did not bring any comfort to Blackwalder. Instead, it was like being scraped by a cold knife, and waves of pain that were deeper than the severe pain in his body continued to emerge. Everything made him want to scream, but his tongue, that had been bitten to pieces, and his throat, that seemed to be dry and broken, could not do this. So he could only hunch over in the straw and struggle silently and hideously, screaming, fearing, recalling, and hating. After being rescued from the twins, Blackwalder experienced a period of hiding, following the molester who saved him, but obviously looked down on him. But when the news came that the crisis in Sealand City was resolved, he could only hide from the waves of hunting teams in the twins by himself, because the molester had abandoned him and turned to Sealand City. This made Blackwalder feel quite regretful, because the other party left without saying goodbye, but if he had known this in advance, he would have definitely taken the money and the strange ring from the other party for his own use. The money was not very important, but the ring was very magical. It could make people flee in panic at a glance, and it was also a weapon for them to escape from the twins. If he had the ring to help him when he encountered the monster. Thinking back to this, his remaining thoughts were filled with pain and regret. Blackwalder, who was hunted by the twins, found himself alone and wanted to turn directly to the north for refuge, but he encountered the terrifying monster on the way. In the past, he had armor on, so he was not too afraid of the thing that could not be killed, but did not have much threat. But now he was a fugitive, his clothes were simple, and he could not avoid being injured in the fight. Even if he was not strong and proficient in close combat, he would not survive the bite of the monster. However, now it seems that the best treatment for him is to die at that time. This thought flashed through his mind vaguely, and then a greater pain came, causing his whole body to twitch violently, and then his legs kicked, and finally he could not hold on, and fell into a coma. So Blackwalder could not understand that after he fell into a coma, his skin began to become wrinkled, grey and white, and finally grew wisps of white hair. He obviously would not notice that his fingernails and toenails were falling off piece by piece, revealing the bright red tender flesh inside, but soon they were covered by sharp black strange nails spreading out one by one. He could not see that at his buttocks, the originally tight pants were constantly stretched up, and finally broke with a hiss, and a sticky grey-white tail stained with unknown liquid sprang out. After a whole night of heavy snow outside, it finally stopped. A farmer passed by the thatched house, and found that the neighbor's house seemed so quiet, so he peeked out the window, and found that his 3 neighbors were lying on the ground with their eyes wide open, obviously dead for a long time. In front of the woman, a terrifying white monster was squatting in front of the corpse, with its shoulders trembling, and the strange chewing sound was trivial and terrifying. The farmer looked at all this in horror, trying to hold back his cry, but couldn't help but step back. However, this faint sound seemed to be noticed by the existence in the house, and the monster in the house with its back to him suddenly turned around and looked at him, revealing a hideous wolf face stained with blood. Screams soon rang out from the village that should have been quiet here and spread rapidly. On the other side of the Seven Kingdoms, in the area of the corner ridge of the river bend, an inconspicuous conversation was also taking place at this time, but it had a far-reaching impact on the future situation. What kind of storm can we stir up in this era with our individual abilities? Barbarian, it is necessary for us to unite. Only when we unite together can we regain the power of the past. A man with short silver hair and a very heroic appearance is now standing in a fenced yard in the forest, staring at a sturdy middle-aged man with a beard, who is silently chopping wood in the yard. I have planned it. First, we will use kidnapping and extortion to accumulate our initial operating funds, then go to the free trade city to find mercenaries, and finally wait for an opportunity to counterattack the Seven Kingdoms. What do you think of this idea, barbarian? There was still no response. The sturdy middle-aged man was still chopping wood silently, and the crackling sound of the axe in his hand chopping on the wooden stakes was very crisp, and it sounded very peaceful outside the cabin in the forest. Are you really willing to be a lumberjack for the rest of your life? Or do you want your descendants to be lumberjacks for who knows how many generations? Don't you want to become the Earl of Hornhill again, and take charge of the Tully family again? The silver-haired man frowned and questioned. You are worse than a dog now. This didn't make the other party angry, but it finally made him look up at the visitor. How many people did you gather? His voice was steady and vicissitudes. What? How many people are there in the so-called alliance you mentioned? 6, including you. The silver-haired man said, but this is just the beginning. We will definitely attract more, but it takes time. Then who are these 6? The silver-haired man hesitated and felt embarrassed when he heard this, but then he answered stubbornly, excluding you and me, there is a tailor girl, 2 farmers, and a bard, all of whom are from our side. So this is your team? The middle-aged man showed a sarcastic expression. When he heard this, Egan was able to conquer the 7 kingdoms with his dragons and his wisdom. And what about you, Meager? As the son of a conqueror, what do you have now? You have no dragons, no wisdom, no identity, and you are not even a man anymore. You want me to follow you? He shook his head, bent down and continued to chop wood. You'd better be a bandit to make some money, then go to the East Continent to live a quiet life, and learn how to be a woman. I really want to see you give birth to a child, but it's a pity that it's destined not to be my child, so forget it. These words were simply insulting. The silver-haired man trembled all over after hearing them, but despite his angry face, he did not draw the long sword on his waist. Instead, he gritted his teeth and left after saying a word. You reject me now, but it doesn't mean you will reject me in the future, Samwell the Barbarian. Let's wait and see. These words made the middle-aged man who was chopping wood pause, and then he couldn't help but look up at the back of the departing figure with a surprised expression. Isle Islands, the sacred coast of Old Wake Island. The result of the war made the entire archipelago immersed in a heavy and sad atmosphere, but at this time on the beach of Old Wake Island, the atmosphere was very warm, even fanatical. The evil storm god brought violent storms to the Greenland, causing the Iron Races to suffer such heavy losses, but the great drowned god has already arranged everything. A bald old drowned man surrounded by the crowd raised his hands and shouted, "The dead never die. Our loved ones have already entered the drowned god's flowing palace and are enjoying the flowing banquet and mermaid service arranged by the drowned god. The dead never die." As soon as the words fell, a loud response came from the dense crowd, including fishermen, soldiers, miners, farmers, and even a few nobles. The listeners all looked excited at this moment, as if they had heard some great news. But the drowned man had not finished speaking. He looked even more fanatical, and he shouted even louder, "The drowned god has solemnly received the Ironborn who fought for him, but he has not given up on us, his pious people. He has sent his son. Yes, the son of the drowned god has already arrived. He saved Eren Greyjoy and brought miracles. He is destined to lead the Ironborn, to restore their former glory. The dead never die, and will rise again, even more powerful." A bigger cheer broke out because of this sentence, and a large number of people began to shout this slogan that has been passed down in the Iron Islands for countless years. Seeing this, the old drowned man hurriedly raised his hand and pressed it down, indicating that he had not finished speaking. The great son of the drowned god has now stepped into the Greenland and observed all the evil in person. Now we need to wait and accumulate strength. Wait for the return of the son of the drowned god. Wait for the revival of the ancient road. And wait for the Iron Islands to rise again. Yes, rise again. Rise again. An old ironman roared after the drowned man's words. More people also echoed loudly. Long live the son of the drowned god. Revenge. The dead never die. The noisy voices gradually faded away, and a man in a grey cloak left the fanatical crowd and walked towards the coastline not far away. Under the hood, he had a face full of ugly scars and an ugly appearance, but his eyes were unusually bright. After reaching the coastline, he pushed a small boat anchored there into the sea, then paddled away from Old Wyke Island and headed towards Great Wyke Island. We need to wait for the return of the son of the drowned god, but we don't need to wait without doing anything, nor do we need those pious flattery. He muttered in a low voice while paddling, recalling the half orange he had eaten when he was on the verge of death, and a hint of fanaticism flashed across his face. Wealth, women, treasures. I want to grab the best things in the world and then give them to him with my own hands. While talking to himself, he paddled faster and more vigorously, and in a place that the people on the boat could not see, an octopus the size of a human head was clinging to the bottom of the boat and riding on this favorable wind boat. Its tentacles drifting with the seawater swayed slightly, as if silently echoing the words of the man on the boat. Somewhere in Essos, in a magnificent and vast hall, an old man dressed as a knight from Westeros was talking to a middle-aged man sitting on the magnificent throne at the end of the hall. However, before he finished speaking, a beautiful silver-haired woman accompanying the middle-aged man suddenly frowned and covered her stomach, directly attracting the attention of the middle-aged man who was originally listening quietly. "What's wrong, ma'am? Is your stomach uncomfortable?" he asked hurriedly. "I seem to feel the child kicking me," the beautiful woman responded, raising her hand to touch her slightly protruding belly, with a smile on the corner of her mouth. "How is this possible? How old is the child? But I really feel it. God bless you. This child must be very healthy." The middle-aged man smiled when he heard this and felt that his wife should be fine, so he raised his hand and patted her arm to comfort her, then turned his head to look at the old knight who was quietly waiting under the throne, and the two boys and girls behind him. "Sir Derry, my attitude towards the restoration of the Targaryen family remains unchanged, and as for the marriage you mentioned," the middle-aged man said, looking at the silver-haired boy with his head raised high behind the old knight, and the young and shy little girl hiding behind the old knight, and couldn't help shaking his head. "My child has not been born yet, and I'm not sure whether it is a boy or a girl, but His Royal Highness is too old and is not a suitable candidate. Princess Daenerys is the same age as my child, so if I have a son, then the marriage may be considered, but if it is a daughter." He didn't finish his words, and the woman next to him covered her stomach again with a cry, which made the middle-aged man's face suddenly become very nervous. "Are you really okay, madam? I'm not sure. Maybe you should go and rest. Madam, I'll take you away now," the middle-aged man said, looking at the three people standing below with an apology, and after a brief conversation, he indicated that the conversation was over. In this regard, the visiting old knight was helpless, but he could only turn around and leave honestly. "He is too presumptuous. I'm a prince." After walking out of the gorgeous hall and arriving at the flat square outside, the silver-haired boy's face showed a trace of anger. "I'm not a beggar who can be easily sent away. But if it weren't for the protection of Lord Seeking, we wouldn't even have a place to live, Your Highness," the old knight replied with a sigh, and then looked at the girl who was holding the corner of his clothes tightly behind her buttocks, and found that her little face was tense and full of tension, and a trace of love flashed in her eyes. "What's wrong with Your Highness the princess?" He squatted down and asked with concern. "I'm hungry," the girl replied in a baby voice. "The story of Renly's childhood has ended. The next stage is a new beginning, so I'm a bit stuck. Also, I need to have my stitches removed this afternoon. So I'll resume updating tomorrow." Chapter 216 Years old. Under the bright sky, a grey-black hawk soared over the dense green forest. Its small, bright black eyes stared at everything in the forest, flashing from time to time, and looked very smart. The forest below was full of noise and bustle. More than a dozen hunting dogs were running wildly from all directions in the forest, shouting and constantly besieging a panicked brown elk. Until it ran out of the forest, a lightning-like arrow suddenly flew over and shot at its slender neck with a hiss, causing the elk to whine and fall to the ground with a plop due to inertia. The wound was bleeding, and the body began to twitch violently. As the agility in the elk's eyes dissipated, a cheer rang out from not far away. It was a celebration of the onlookers, and the young hunter who shot the arrows looked at the prey that he had shot and couldn't help but raise his head, looking a little proud. At the same time, facing a group of hunting dogs running out of the forest, he was obviously very fond of it, and even called the dogs to come over to receive the reward. However, the group of hounds with brown and black fur ignored the archer. After they came out, they circled around the prey for a few times. After they were sure that it would not survive, they all ran to a brown-haired and bearded young man who was sitting on the side of a low table at the edge of the green grass field farther away. After getting a few pieces of fresh meat from the other party, they shook their heads and surrounded the black-haired one sitting opposite the brown-haired young man. The sound of flattering whimpering followed one after another. One of the hounds even lowered its head and put the raw meat in its mouth on its knees. "Eat my food, live in my house, but run to you to seek credit. Renly, no matter what method you use, don't you think it's too cruel to seduce my girls so arrogantly?" Looking at the affection of his own dogs in front of and behind each other, the brown-haired and bearded young man sighed. "I raise them all. Not only do you raise them, but you also give them the food you give them, Willis." The brown-haired boy who came over said jealously after hearing this. "Renly, do you know how hard it is to snatch food from a dog's mouth?" He was the archer just now. He was originally quite proud of successfully hunting a deer, but unfortunately the situation he saw now made him feel inexplicably depressed, and he didn't care much about the prey behind him that was being gutted by the servants. In response, the black-haired boy surrounded by hunting dogs smiled and replied, "I haven't snatched it, how can I know?" This sounded nothing, but combined with his expression, the brown-haired boy's face turned black, and then he rolled his eyes and explained, "I haven't snatched it either, don't get me wrong." The black-haired boy shrugged and ignored it. Instead, he raised his hand and patted the dog's head that handed him the food, then fed it the piece of fresh meat himself, and then patted the dog's head again. The dog cleverly led the other dogs to the woods. There was a horn sounded over there, proving that the hunters in the forest had found prey again. As hunting dogs, they naturally couldn't ignore their own duties. Of course, the brown-haired boy Gullin standing aside, and some other nobles from the side branches were also busy. The crowd around the small table dispersed, leaving only the two people sitting here leisurely, looking at the two servants who were roasting chestnuts and sausages around the charcoal grill not far ahead from time to time, and expressing their expectations. However, there were actually a bunch of small snacks with medieval characteristics on the small table, but whether it was the black-haired or brown-haired one, they didn't talk much, and the purpose of their discussion was not how much they expected the food, but just talking casually, because they were bored. However, this boring conversation was interrupted by an eagle with gray-black feathers. With the sound of its wings flapping in the wind, a white rabbit was thrown by the eagle onto the grass beside the black-haired boy. The rabbit was dizzy, and before it could react, the black-haired boy stretched out a slender hand and grabbed it. This made the eyelids of the bearded young man opposite Willis jump. "I have never seen you learn to tame animals, Renly. How did you train this eagle to be so smart? It even knows to catch live rabbits for you?" The black-haired boy just smiled. "It's natural. There's nothing I can do." Willis was helpless when he heard this. History, language, poetry, writing, shooting. The man in front of him has a wide range of knowledge, but he has never read any books related to taming wild animals, and he doesn't even have the slightest interest in hunting. So how did he tame these animals? This is an unsolved mystery that has been circulating in high court for a long time, and the degree of unknown is comparable to how this person's character, who doesn't have much fireworks, was developed. Thinking about it, Willis looked at a cane placed beside him, and a trace of sadness flashed in his eyes. People who don't fight are excellent in every aspect, but he who actively strives for the future has encountered a huge setback in life. A few years ago, he participated in a tournament, but unfortunately broke his leg, so that he, the heir of Highgarden, became a cripple and could no longer be a knight. We have a new mission recently. The depression in his heart did not affect his outward smile. Willis said to Renly, as if he had thought of something. Lord Drown of Golden Tree City wants us to go to Horn Hill to catch a robber who killed people in his territory. How much is the reward? Renly raised his eyelids and asked. 10 gold dragons. Renly nodded. It sounds a little, equivalent to his first pocket money, but in fact, 10 gold dragons is a huge sum of money in the 7 kingdoms. A commoner probably can't make so much money in his lifetime. What about the clues? There are general facial features, but no specific clues. Willis replied, Lord Drown and Lord Tully don't have a good relationship, and there is no suitable person to find clues, so we are asked to go and find out in person. Renly shrugged his shoulders. Then call the group members. It's hard to find without clues. Just think of it as going on a trip. It's not easy. There has been no news about errors recently. I guess he is still busy with their family affairs in Ancient Oak. The Apple brothers went to the border of Dawn to suppress bandits and may not come back for a while. Mark is nearby, and there is also Sinford. Willis counted them one by one and found that there were not many people. However, the target is just one or a few rural bandits, which does not require many people. Renly, who is thinking of going on a trip, doesn't care about it. It was summer in the 294th year of the Conquest era, and 9 years had passed since the rebellion in the Iron Islands. Over the years, he has grown from a 7-year-old child to 16 years old, but during this period, Renly did not wait to grow up, but did many things. One of them was to form a knight group with Willis, who could no longer be a knight. This was originally mainly to test how to advance his so-called Night King career. The effect was not ideal, but it gradually developed into a way to make money. In recent years, a group of young knights have been running around the river bay, making some reputations, and with fame, there are naturally more missions. In the continent of Westeros, organizations such as the Knights Order are not very popular. There are also few knights in the river bay, where the knight culture is prosperous. In addition, all of them are from noble families. No matter where they go, the lords regard them as rare animals. They are so memorable that they can think of them subconsciously when encountering things. But in fact, this so-called Knight's Order is nothing high-end. In the final analysis, it is just a high-level mercenary, helping the lords of the river bay solve some problems that they are not convenient to solve. In addition to the Knight's Order, Renly also established an intelligence network, which is also where money is burned. But these are all external situations. Relatively speaking, he actually pays more attention to internal changes. His personal changes are not many, but not few either. The most obvious is that there is a progress bar on his attribute panel. Thank you to the book friend Shulan Ping for the 1000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Kangshan Fuxusha Beitao for the 500 reward. Thank you to the book friend Xianatang 246 for the 200 reward. Thank you to the book friend DBG who loves reading, the book friend Banbi Shyangsha, the book friend Zinjlo, the book friend Lipinguali 303 and the book friend Yajai 2304 for the 100 reward. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.